Hey guys, tonight we sail straight into a storm of sweat, salt, and suppressed desire. You're standing on the creaking deck of a 17th century ship, the ocean of vast, moaning emptiness around you. The sails are full, the wind is biting, and there isn't a single woman aboard. Just 200 men, 200 needs, and nowhere to go but further out to sea. The air smells like tar, fish guts, and damp wood. You're sticky with sweat, even though it's cold, and when night falls, there's nowhere to hide. Not from the others, not from yourself. You probably won't survive this, at least not the way you think. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is right now. I'm curious who's drifting off where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull your hammock tight between two beams and climb in, trying not to think about how close everyone is. Just a thin canvas keeps you from the sleeping breath of the next man. The guy above you snores like he's choking on rope, and someone below has been farting for an hour. But that's not what's keeping you awake. It's the tension. It's the weight of all that longing crammed into a wooden box bobbing across the sea. And it hits you. There are no women. None. Not for weeks, maybe months. Just this endless floating prison of sweat-stained uniforms, coarse jokes, and silent stares that last a second too long. You look around and realize everyone's pretending this isn't driving them insane, that the absence isn't gnawing at their guts like rats in the hold, that they're fine eating weevils and salt beef and not seeing a single soft curve. But the lies hang in the air like smoke. They talk about women in loud, raucous bursts, shouting stories that sound suspiciously rehearsed. You hear about a wench with breasts as big as melons in a brothel at Port Royal, about a redhead who could make a man forget the war. But the laughter is too fast, too hollow, like they're talking just to drown out the real story pulsing under the boards. Because here's the truth. You're on a ship full of men, and desire doesn't just disappear. It folds itself into things, into glances, into jokes that land just off, into arguments that get physical too fast. You see it in the way someone lingers after helping another guy tie his belt, in how someone carves a woman's face into the masthead, not from memory, but from imagination. It's desperation, sculpted in wood. The bosun once caught a boy touching himself behind a barrel. Everyone knew. They flogged him so bad he pissed blood for a week, but nobody talked about why it happened. The rule was simple: don't bring it up. Don't ask, don't tell, don't wonder. Because once you do, you risk breaking the fragile crust of normalcy everyone's clinging to. And beneath that crust, a boiling sea of want. Historians still argue whether this level of suppression made sailors tougher or broke them faster. Some say it created a stoic endurance that defined maritime masculinity. Others point to the rampant violence, the short tempers, the eruptions of madness as proof that something inside those men eventually cracked. You think about what they're missing, not just sex, but touch, warmth, the comfort of being looked at with softness. The way a woman might ask if you're cold or press her hand against your cheek without expecting anything in return. Here, everything is transactional. Everything is hard. Even the water tastes like iron and mold. And after a few weeks, the idea of femininity becomes not just erotic, but mythological. That's when the stories begin to mutate. Men start talking about mermaids again, and not like fairy tales, like sightings. She had green eyes, one guy whispers, and breasts like the moon. You hear about sirens off the coast of West Africa, or women who walk on waves and pull sailors under with kisses. Some swear they've seen them. Some swear they've touched them. You stop laughing after a while, because you kind of want it to be true. You kind of need it to be. One night, a guy named Jory climbs into the wrong hammock. You pretend to be asleep, but he doesn't move for a long time. His breath is shallow, like he's debating something. Eventually, he mutters sorry and climbs back down. You never speak of it. But after that, you notice the way he looks at you when he thinks you're not watching. Not hungry, just lost. Like a man looking for land. Back then, you'd find entries in ship logs about unrest among the men, or disciplinary actions taken for lewd behavior. They never said what actually happened, but journals hidden in trunks, passed down or sold at auction, tell another story. One sailor wrote about watching another man bathe on deck and feeling such stirring in my limbs that I feared I'd gone mad. Another confessed that he longed for the softness of any touch, even if given in anger. That's what isolation does. It strips the boundaries off your mind, makes you realize how little it takes to start craving someone. And then there's the smell. You can't escape it. Sweat, piss, old food, wet rope. It's in everything. The wood itself seems to exhale it. At night, it wraps around you, making your dreams thick with body heat and phantom caresses. You wake up hard, ashamed, furious. There's nowhere to go with it. Not really. So some men pray, some drink if there's rum. Others get violent just to feel something else. You remember one guy, Rafe? Big hands, quiet voice. He started carving a woman out of driftwood. At first it was a joke, then it got good. Too good. Her breasts were round, her mouth slightly open. Rafe started talking to her, feeding her bits of biscuit. One night, he tried to take her into his hammock. The next morning, the figurehead was gone, tossed overboard by the captain, who said it was disturbing morale. The captain never said what he found more disturbing, the carving or the fact that half the crew was staring at it too long. Meanwhile, sex didn't vanish. It just went underground. Quiet pacts, secret pairings. Two men might share a hammock for warmth, might watch each other's backs, might never say what passed between them in the dark. And when they reached port, they'd go their separate ways, chasing women they'd never stop talking about, but never seemed to stay with long. You don't talk about love on the ship. You don't talk about yearning, but it's there. In the way someone touches your shoulder too long. In the carved initials hidden on a beam. In a song hummed at night, always the same one. You try not to listen too closely, because the sea has a way of pulling things out of you. Things you buried back on land. Things you're not sure you can name, but feel anyway. Section 2. You wake to shouting. It's not unusual. Tempers flare fast out here, like sparks on tar. You climb down from your hammock, already bracing for the sour sweat, the clatter of boots, the inevitable stench of fear and fermented rage. Two sailors are going at it, again. One throws a tin cup. The other hurls a half-eaten biscuit like it's a cannonball. It's loud, ugly, and yet, you've seen worse fights over smaller things. A joke, a misheard grunt, someone bumping into someone else in the darkness. That's the thing about months without women. It doesn't just dry out your body. It warps your sense of touch, of closeness, of what's acceptable. And somewhere in that gray area between hunger and hatred, men stop knowing where the line is. Maybe that's why these fights start. It's less about anger and more about the need to feel something against your skin, even if it's a punch. The captain's voice cuts through the chaos, sharp and bored, as if he's breaking up a brawl between toddlers. They'll get flogged later, you know it. Or worse, lose shore leave. But for now, it's over. Everyone goes back to pretending nothing happened. That's the rule. You pretend you didn't see the way they looked at each other just before the first punch landed. Not with hate, but something more twisted. Something like fear, maybe, or shame, maybe even lust, though no one dares name it. Historians still argue whether these ships bred their own emotional languages. One theory says long-term male-only confinement triggered a kind of tribal regression, a reversion to primitive dominance hierarchies where touch, threat, and tension replaced language. Another theory insists it was more nuanced, that under the harsh surface, men formed intimate, if coded, bonds that didn't require the labels of land life. All you know is, On this ship, tenderness is more taboo than violence. You see it everywhere. In the jokes, the constant ribbing, the dirty ballads sung while scrubbing decks, the nicknames that cut deep just enough to sting. It's not cruelty, it's camouflage. Say something soft and you're suspicious. Say something cruel and you're safe. So you learn the rhythm. Insult, spit, laugh. Repeat. But some break the pattern. There's a guy named Sully. He's wiry, probably too smart for this place, and always scribbling in a little leather book he keeps stuffed in his boot. No one knows what's in it. He's not loud, doesn't fight much, just watches. One night, when the others are gambling with bones and shouting about who could last longest in a brothel, Sully leans over and asks you if you ever miss being looked at. Not just wanted, but seen. You blink, stare at your hands, lie. Nah. He nods like he understands, but the next day, he doesn't speak to you. Like your lie hurt him more than any truth could have. Then there's Tomas. Big, slow-moving, with shoulders like barrels. He's missing 2 fingers, but can still tie a rig blindfolded. No one messes with him. Which is why it's surprising when you catch him helping the youngest deckhand, barely 15, shivering in the rain, sobbing over a snapped line. Tomas doesn't shout. Doesn't mock, just wraps the boy in his coat and sits there, humming a song with no words. No one else sees. Or if they do, they pretend not to. Because compassion is dangerous out here. It makes people ask questions. That's why the ship's punishment system thrives, not just for order, but to maintain the performance. If someone lashes out physically, they're punished. But if someone reaches out emotionally, it's more complicated. You've heard rumors of men being locked in the brig not for violence, but for inappropriate attachments, for unnatural affection. Of course, they don't write it that way in the logs. They call it insubordination, disruption, or just troublemaking. But the crew knows. The crew always knows. You remember reading something years ago about ancient monasteries. How monks, locked away from the world, would form intense emotional bonds with each other. Not sexual, not always, but raw, intimate, and taboo nonetheless. Ships are like floating monasteries with worse hygiene and more rope burns. Men here start to create their own kinds of closeness, bonds born out of proximity, boredom, and unspoken need. A hand lingering too long, a shared secret, a joke told just between 2 people. It doesn't always become something, but sometimes it does. And that's when things get dangerous. Once, late at night, you hear whispers from the shadows near the bow. 2 men, pressed close. One says something like, "Just until we dock." The other laughs, not cruel, soft, like he's been waiting for that offer. You slip past them quietly, not wanting to interrupt, but it sticks in your head. Just until we dock. As if everything that happens out here doesn't count. As if the sea suspends morality, bends the rules, and once your feet hit land, you can just press reset. But it doesn't work like that. Not really. And yet, even in this tense, tightrope walk environment, bonds form that have nothing to do with sex or secrets. There's a strange kind of intimacy in fighting beside someone in a storm, in scrubbing each other's vomit off the deck, in sharing lice combs without blinking. These are relationships forged in sweat and salt and silence. You don't call them friendships. That's too soft a word. But you know who would die for you, and who you'd bleed for, and in a place where death is always just a cracked mast or rogue wave away. That means something. Historians have a term for it: ritualized masculinity. The idea that in all male environments, especially under stress, men develop their own emotional codes, ones where gestures, loyalty, and shared risk replace confession. You don't say, "I care about you." You say, "I'll take your watch." You don't hug. You pass someone the last dried apricot and act like it means nothing. But it does. It always does. You learn the difference between loneliness and solitude. At first, they feel the same, a dull ache under your ribs. But eventually you realize solitude can be chosen, can even be sacred. Loneliness, though, is when you're surrounded by people and still feel like you're sinking. That's what makes ships dangerous, the illusion of company. Which brings us to the fights. Not the big, bloody ones, but the smaller ones, the ones with teeth. The kind that erupt over spilled soup or a bad hand of dice, where someone says something about someone's sister, and suddenly there's a blade drawn. You start to recognize the signs: twitchy hands, fast breathing, a silence too loud to ignore. And you realize these fights aren't about the fight. They're about pressure, about trying to release something you don't have words for. Sailors in journals called it getting the fog, that slow madness that creeps into your head when the sea stretches too long and the nights offer no relief. The fog makes men cry for no reason, makes them laugh when someone falls, makes them stare too long at the stars and wonder what they've become. You get the fog sometimes, usually around week 6. It curls around your brain and tells you that no one's waiting back home, that maybe you never had a home, that maybe the only real thing is the sound of waves and the weight of another man breathing above you. One night, someone tries to jump overboard. He's pulled back, silent, eyes wide. He doesn't speak again for days. Later, he says he thought he saw a woman's face in the water, pale, smiling, calling him home. Everyone laughs, nervously, and life goes on. You scrub, you eat, you sleep. You dream of skin you haven't touched in months, of softness you're starting to forget. And every now and then you catch someone's eye a little too long, and you wonder what they're dreaming about too. You learn quickly that the most forbidden act on the ship isn't theft or even violence, it's touching yourself. Masturbation is the one sin that's both universal and unmentionable. You're surrounded by men whose entire lives are defined by grit and discipline, but behind barrels, under hammocks, or in the privacy of the head, everyone is giving in. Quietly, desperately, and then pretending it never happened. The ship is a floating contradiction. Your body's needs don't stop, but your reputation depends on pretending you don't have them. It's a strange sort of gaslighting, and it works only because everyone agrees to the same lie. But you know what happens when one person breaks the spell. You're on night watch when it happens. A new recruit, barely 16, cheeks still soft from land life, gets caught with his hands down his breeches. The look on his face isn't lust, it's panic, like a child caught stealing bread. The punishment comes swift, not just a flogging, but public shaming. They line him up and read aloud the charge: self-abuse. The words echo strangely in the wind, sterile and cold. No one laughs. That's the worst part. Not one chuckle. Just silence, as the bosun delivers each lash. The boy doesn't cry until the end. When he's allowed to walk again, he doesn't meet anyone's eyes. He never will. A week later, he's transferred to another ship. No one says why, but you know. Everyone knows. Historians still argue whether these crackdowns were about morality or control. Was it religion, drilled into the bones of every British sailor? Or was it about suppressing vulnerability, keeping men so tightly wound they were easier to steer than the ship itself? Either way, it leaves scars. Not just on backs, but in minds. You catch yourself, some nights, lying absolutely still, hands clenched, terrified of wanting anything, as if desire itself might be seen, might be punished, might betray you. But it doesn't stop the urges. You're human, and the sea doesn't care about discipline. It wraps around the hull, thick and primal, whispering. Everything becomes sensual out here. The way sweat runs down your back, the soft creak of wood in the dark, the brief graze of another man's fingers passing a tin cup. It's no surprise that men invent rituals to protect themselves from themselves. They tell each other that spilling seed brings bad luck, that it angers the sea spirits, that it drains strength. Every drop costs a knot of wind, one old sailor mutters as he chews tobacco. Wank too much and we'll stall in the doldrums. Superstition becomes law when logic breaks down. You've heard about crews who buried sinful sailors' breeches at sea, hoping to cleanse the voyage. One captain reportedly made men wash their hands in vinegar after every night watch, just in case. You laugh at first, then you stop laughing. Because when you're weeks from land, when food is down to hardtack and weevil powder, when every sunset looks the same, and the world is only blue and gray, those little rituals become anchors, even the absurd ones. You hear a story passed around from ship to ship, a tale about a sailor who claimed his right hand was cursed, said he touched himself during a storm, and the next day, lightning struck the mast. He wore gloves after that, even in the heat, swore it was the devil watching. These tales aren't just warnings, they're symptoms. Men need reasons for their guilt. They need consequences that feel cosmic. Because the idea that nothing happens, no punishment, no fire from heaven, might be more terrifying, might mean they're just alone with it. One of the weirder tales comes from a French crew. You hear it over a game of bones. They say a sailor carved a tiny idol of Venus and prayed to it before every act of self-relief. He built a little shrine in his locker, whispered apologies, offered biscuits. One night, someone caught him kissing it. No one knows what happened next. The story cuts off, but you remember it. Because there's something painfully human about it. The need to make a ritual out of shame. Meanwhile, landlubbers back home imagine sailors as wild, sex-fueled beasts. That's the great irony. In their minds, you're either sleeping with a mermaid or a prostitute every other night. They write songs, sell paintings, tell stories of maritime debauchery. They don't realize how long the stretches are between ports, how silent the nights, how many men go months, sometimes years, without so much as a hug. Or maybe they do realize. Maybe that's why they make the stories so loud, to drown out the truth. But even in these lonely stretches, sex doesn't vanish. It adapts. You hear about one captain who installed a chastity plank. Supposedly, a narrow-board sailors had to walk naked once a month under the eye of a priest to cleanse their urges. Another crew swore by cold baths in the morning to lower the blood. And then there's the ever-present discipline. Rope floggings meant not just to punish, but to redirect. Pain becomes a substitute for pleasure. You think that's insane, until the third week when you start to understand it. There's a strange moment one night when a friend of yours, Callum, tells you about a dream. He's drunk on what little rum he's hoarded. He leans in and whispers, "She touched my neck, just my neck, and it was enough." Then he laughs like he doesn't believe it himself. You realize it's not the sex people miss most. It's the gentleness, the slow things, a kiss on the wrist, a hand brushing through hair. Out here, no one touches gently, not unless it's a mistake or a secret. You wonder how men survive this. Month after month, year after year, some don't. Some arrive at port and fall apart. Spend their entire pay on a night of clumsy, desperate intimacy. Some come back changed, some never go home again. And still, the ship sails on. You haul lines, scrape barnacles, scrub the deck until your knuckles bleed. The body is a machine, trained to obey. But the mind, your mind, keeps wandering. Back to that one time someone brushed your shoulder and didn't pull away. Back to the silence after the storm when everyone just breathed together. Back to whatever dream you had last night, so real it left your mouth dry. You find ways to cope. Everyone does. Some write poems in ledgers meant for navigation logs. Some carve initials into the mast. Some talk to the stars, pretending there's someone listening. And some just wait. For land, for a brothel, for anything soft. You start counting days not by meals, but by dreams. You stop asking when you'll see a woman again. You start asking when you'll remember how it felt. And the sea? She doesn't care. She keeps rolling, endlessly indifferent. She'll take your loneliness and grind it into foam. She'll swallow your secrets, your urges, your whispered apologies to the wind, and she'll give you nothing back but silence. You wake up sweating, heart racing, and it's not the heat, it's the dream. Again. This time she had no face, just hair like seaweed and a voice like warm rain on canvas. You felt her weight on your chest, her breath in your ear, and then the splash, the cold emptiness, the sound of rope fraying somewhere in your brain. You lie there, stunned, your body twitching with need and confusion, and it hits you. You haven't seen a woman in 91 days, not even a painting, not even a silhouette in the mist. Just men, salt, and the color gray. And yet desire doesn't fade. It just changes shape, morphs into shadows and skinless touch. You roll over, pretending to sleep, pretending not to hear the rustling from the next hammock, pretending the ship isn't full of men doing the same thing in silence, pretending it's normal. But here's the thing, nobody says out loud, when there are no women, desire doesn't die. It reroots. It finds the nearest warm body and whispers, why not? You start noticing things, the shape of a shoulder blade, the way someone runs his hand through his hair, the way another man sleeps curled in a way that reminds you of someone you once loved. And you hate yourself for it at first. But after a few more weeks, you stop hating. You just exist with it. Let it sit in your bones like the salt air. Not quite welcome, but not going anywhere. That's when the word starts floating around in hushed voices, buggery. It's always whispered, always spat like poison, not discussed, just hinted at. The Royal Navy's articles of war are clear. If any person shall commit the unnatural and detestable sin of buggery, the punishment is death. No trial, no mercy, just a noose and silence. But here's what they never admit. Every ship has its shadows. Every crew has its secrets. Because when you cram hundreds of men into a wooden box for half a year, something has to give. And it's not always the rigging. Historians still argue whether homosexual behavior on long voyages was common or merely visible. Some say it was rare, happening only in extreme isolation. Others argue it was systemic, so ingrained in maritime culture that entire micro-societies formed beneath the surface. What's certain is that sailors, like anyone, are human, and humans don't stop needing closeness just because the law says so. You hear about shipmates, not just friends but chosen partners. They share hammocks, share secrets, share nights. There's even a term, sea marriages, unofficial, unspoken, but deeply real. Two men agreeing, wordlessly, to fill the absence together. One journal from the 1760s talks about companions who lay as man and wife and served each other in all ways. Another from a French ship uses the term époux de mer, husbands of the sea. One evening you see it happen. Two sailors, one older, one younger, arguing over a misread chart. The tension snaps, but instead of throwing fists, they walk off together. You follow, out of habit. They don't know you're there, crouched behind barrels. You watch as one leans in, forehead pressed against the other's. Nothing more, just that touch. And in that moment, you feel like an intruder into something ancient and holy. Not sex, something deeper, need. A need that's too raw to name, too big to punish. And still, the threat hangs over them. If anyone reports it, if the captain decides to make an example, the rope will be waiting. You've heard of it happening. One man caught in the act, hanged at sunrise, no burial, body dumped overboard for the dignity of the fleet. No one talks during breakfast after those mornings. Everyone chews in silence, eyes fixed on the wood grain. The silence becomes part of the ship's architecture. And yet, for all the danger, these bonds persist. Because the alternative is something worse, something empty. You've seen the men who have no one. Not a friend, Not a word spoken to them in days. They start talking to the sky, rocking themselves to sleep. One scratched the word tender into his bunk, letter by letter, over 2 months. That's what loneliness does. It makes you scream soft words into hard wood. There's a theory you overheard from a pipe-smoking quartermaster. The sea is queer, he said, half joking, because it takes all the rules from land and drops them overboard. At the time, you laughed, but now you're not so sure he was wrong. The sea doesn't care about categories, about purity, about punishment. She just wants flesh and silence. And when she gets both, she whispers back. There's a story from an old Portuguese galleon passed between ships like contraband. The cook found 2 boys in the pantry, tangled up in a stolen hammock. The captain ordered them flogged, but the boatswain refused, said they were saving each other. That night, a storm hit. The boys died trying to cut a line loose. After that, no one mentioned the pantry again, but the crew started leaving scraps of food by the door, as if feeding ghosts. You think about that as you watch the ship's shadow stretch across the moonlit water. Everyone thinks the danger is in the sea, the storms, the leaks, the pirates, but sometimes the real danger is inside, the thing you can't name, the longing, the hunger that bends your mind and makes even the hard corners of a man's jaw seem soft. You tell yourself it's just the boredom, just the cold, just the need. But deep down you know that's not true, not entirely. You remember a story from The History of Sexuality, the bit about prisons, how bodies, once confined, rewire themselves. The same thing happens here. The ship is a prison, a cathedral, a theater of unsaid things. Men reinvent themselves here, sometimes just to survive. One minute you're spitting over the side, laughing about a prostitute in Tortuga. The next, you're wondering what your bunkmate's lips might feel like if you asked. And still, you do nothing. You sleep, you work, you dream. You try not to notice when someone lingers beside you just a heartbeat too long. You try not to notice when your own hands betray you. You try not to notice anything at all. Because noticing is dangerous. Because noticing is human. Because noticing means you remember what it feels like to want. And you're not sure you can afford to remember that. You smell it before you see it. Land. The shift is almost imperceptible, but your nose catches it first. The faint hint of smoke, citrus, and human life that doesn't stink of tar or unwashed bodies. Then the coastline emerges, blurry at first, then solid and sun-baked. The men lean over the rails like hounds catching scent, eyes wild, mouths twitching into grins that border on manic. Port means one thing: women. Or more accurately, the idea of women. The relief, the fantasy, the sudden possibility of contact so long denied it's become legend. And just like that, the entire ship comes alive with a kind of energy you haven't seen in months. Something primal, electric, and not entirely sane. But you also know the rules. This hunger doesn't stay on deck. It explodes in alleys, in rooms with wallpaper peeled by steam and sighs, in buildings that reek of sweat and perfume, and stories better left untold. You hit the docks like a shot fired from a cannon. Coins clink, feet scatter, and the brothels open like gaping mouths, ready to swallow entire paydays whole. You follow the current because there's no choice. It sweeps you along, past fruit vendors, shouting children, and half-dressed girls leaning from windows with painted smiles and hollow eyes. You pretend not to notice the way they scan the crowd. Not for lovers, but for danger, for money, for the moment when fantasy and transaction become inseparable. The place you end up smells like rum and carnations. There's a piano missing 2 keys, a madam with a voice like crushed velvet, and girls arranged like bouquets, each one trained to speak soft, smile wide, and never ask where you've been. You pick one not because you're in love or even particularly drawn to her, but because she has the kindest eyes. You don't know what that means anymore. Kindness. But it seems like a good place to start. Historians still argue whether brothels near ports were empowering havens or exploitative traps. Some claim the women used sailors as cash cows, easy marks too desperate to negotiate. Others say the sailors used the women, treating them like opium, a short high to forget how badly they needed real touch. The truth is probably both, or neither. You don't ask the girl her story. She doesn't ask yours. You undress like you're shedding a skin, and for a moment the room disappears. Not because the sex is transcendent, it's not, but because she lets you rest your head on her chest afterward. No words. Just a hand running through your hair like you're not a monster. The next day, you wake up disoriented and broke. Your legs ache. Your soul's somewhere behind the wallpaper. You walk out and see a shipmate in the alley, vomiting. He smiles when he sees you, teeth yellow, eyes bright. "Hell of a night," he says. But there's a tremor in his voice, like something broke open, and now he's not sure how to close it again. He won't talk about it. You won't either. That's the unspoken rule. Port stays in port. But the ache follows you back to the ship like a ghost in your boots. Some don't make it back. Every port has a few who vanish, either by choice or by consequence. One guy got stabbed over a misunderstanding. Another ran off with a woman he swore was different. A third just walked into the jungle and never came back. And no one mourns them properly. The sea teaches you that grief is a luxury. You move on. You raise a cup. You make a joke. You hoist the sail. There's a kind of whiplash to returning to the ship. The wooden walls feel tighter, the men quieter. There's a guilt that settles in your belly, not because of what you did, but because of what it didn't fix. You still feel hollow, still feel the buzz of the girl's perfume on your skin, mixing now with sweat and rope fibers. You try to hold on to her touch, but it fades faster than you thought possible. Just a memory now, a warm shadow. And then there's the danger. The other thing no one talks about. Disease. You hear whispers already. One of the older sailors is coughing hard, can't hold food. Another has a rash that makes his nights unbearable. The doc's got mercury and prayer, and not much else. They call it the French disease, as if naming it makes it less frightening. Syphilis, they say in quiet voices. The price of pleasure. The cost of pretending. You check yourself every morning now. Paranoid, searching your skin for signs of betrayal. In Sex with Kings, there's this passage about courtiers dousing themselves in rose oil before bedding royalty, because even sex at that level required theater. On ships, it's the opposite. There's no rose oil, no scripts. Just raw need, blunt desire, and the hope that someone else's loneliness can fill the shape of your own. It never does, but you pretend, because pretending gets you through another day. You watch your fellow sailors change after port. Some become gentler, as if the brief exposure to femininity softened them. Others grow harsher, louder, meaner, more desperate, like the taste of it reminded them of everything they don't have. You see a fight break out over a scarf left behind by a prostitute. Not even valuable, just smelled like her. Two grown men nearly break each other's teeth for a scrap of fabric and memory. That's what you're up against out here, the battlefield between the real and the remembered. One night, you find an old love letter tucked into the folds of your coat, from a girl named Elise. You don't even remember where she lived, somewhere coastal maybe. You read it in the lantern light, her words stiff and floral, describing the color of her dress, the way her garden's blooming, how she prays for your safety. You want to believe she still cares, that she still remembers. But part of you knows that letter's years old. She's probably married, probably forgotten your name. And yet, you keep it, fold it tight, put it back in your coat like armor. Because even if it's not real anymore, it was once. And sometimes, that's enough. You wonder what happens to the women who meet sailors. Do they fall in love? Do they keep trinkets? Or do they watch the ships leave and forget the faces? You like to think someone remembers you. Someone smells rope and rum and thinks of that night. But maybe that's just ego. Maybe no one does. Still, you dream of her again. Not Elise, not the brothel girl. Someone new. A woman with ink-stained hands who presses her forehead to yours and says nothing at all. And you wake up with tears in your eyes. Not from sadness, just need. It hums in your bones now, constant, unrelenting. The kind of need that makes land unbearable and the sea almost kind. You think you've seen everything. Fights, longing, disease, men crying into their hammocks. But then someone brings a goat on board and suddenly everything shifts. She's supposed to be for milk. That's the official line. But you've been around long enough to know when something's not quite right. The way some men stare too long. The way others look away too quickly. You feel it ripple through the ship, silent and shameful. It starts with jokes, always does. That goat's getting more attention than the captain. Then the laughter fades, and one morning, the goat's been moved. No one says where, or why, and no one asks. That's how it always starts, with silence. Because when you've been at sea too long, and every human face around you is sunburnt, filthy, and scowling, the mind begins to shift. Not like madness exactly, more like erosion. The boundaries blur. The mind searches for softness, any softness, even where it should never look. Historians still argue whether zoophilia at sea was desperation or deviance. Some insist these are exaggerated tales, spun by enemies or land-bound moralists. Others dig through naval archives and find coded entries, crewmen reassigned after improper conduct with livestock, or unusual incident involving provisions. And you know the truth lies somewhere in between. You've seen men go weeks without speaking. You've seen what hunger does, not just for food, but for touch, for heat, for connection. One guy kept a stuffed doll carved from rags and rope, treated it like a lover. Another claimed the ship's figurehead was watching him, that her wooden lips moved at night, whispering comfort in a voice only he could hear. The strange part is, after a while, it doesn't seem strange. That's the real horror. Your sense of normal stretches until it warps completely. You walk past the goat and you don't even flinch. Because part of you thinks, well, maybe that's better than going mad. Maybe it's better than staring into the dark every night, gripping your blanket so tight your knuckles crack. You understand now why sailors tattoo women on their arms. It's not art. It's survival. A reminder. A hope. You start to wonder if the men who laugh at these stories would do any better, would stay any saner in the vacuum you now call home. You remember a passage from Peter Webb's The Erotic Spirit Through History about ancient rites involving animal imagery, how early cultures blurred the lines between human and beast in their pursuit of fertility and power. You think of that sometimes when you watch the crew feed the goat, how gentle their hands become, how quiet, how some of them smile like boys again. It's not about lust, it's about projection, desperate projection. When the world offers you no affection, you start looking for it anywhere, even in the eyes of a creature that cannot return it. There was a boy once, a cook's assistant, barely out of childhood. He kept a chicken, not for food, for company. He named her Alice, talked to her every morning while stirring porridge. The others thought it was funny, then sad, then unsettling. One day Alice was gone. The boy never smiled again. You watched him slowly unravel, not dramatically, but in silence. He stopped eating, stopped speaking, started sleeping beside the fire pit like a dog. One morning, he didn't wake up. No one said anything, just tossed him overboard with the same ritual they gave to officers. And you realize it's not just disease and storms that kill men at sea. Sometimes it's loneliness. Sometimes it's the thing they bury so deep it eats them from the inside. The ship becomes a world of substitutions, a world where nothing is quite what it should be. A touch is never just a touch. A glance can last too long or not long enough. You start to dread the moments when you catch someone looking at you with need in their eyes, because it means they're about to ask something wordless, something you might not be able to refuse. Not because you want to say yes, but because you're too tired to say no. That's the real danger. Not lust, not violence, but exhaustion. The way it wears you down until even your boundaries feel negotiable. One night you hear muffled sounds from the hold. You don't investigate. No one does. The sounds stop eventually, and in the morning 2 men sit a little further apart than usual. They don't speak, don't look at each other, and that tells you everything. This isn't romance. It's not even friendship. It's survival through contact. The kind of contact you forget before morning, or try to. You'd be amazed what people can do in silence, what they can forget, what they can become. You think about the Greeks, about how their philosophers argued that love between men was the purest kind, that women were distractions, that male intimacy sharpened virtue. But this isn't Athens. This isn't noble. It's soaked in salt and secrecy, in moments you can't write down. You start to wonder if there's a difference between affection and erosion, between need and compulsion. You remember reading about a Roman shipwreck where 2 skeletons were found curled together. Some said it was proof of ancient romance. Others said it was just 2 men dying the way they lived, together because there was no one else. You don't know which version you believe, but you know both feel real. You once saw a man talk to the moon for an hour, whispering, not praying, conversing. You stood and listened and didn't interrupt, because you understood. You talk to the moon sometimes too. Everyone does. The moon never asks for explanations. You find a small figurine tucked into a beam one day. It's crude, just a lump of clay shaped into a woman's curve. But someone made it, hid it, needed it. You don't take it. You just look. And you wonder how many other hidden things live aboard this ship. How many silent deals, quiet understandings, invisible lines of affection that no one dares speak of. You start to realize that these secrets don't rot a ship. They hold it together. They're the glue, the quiet rituals that keep men from falling apart. Still, you dread the day when one of these secrets bursts into the open, when a look lasts too long in front of the wrong person, when someone confesses, maybe in drunkenness or despair. You know what happens then. Not always a trial, sometimes just a push, a fall from the rigging, an accident during storm prep. The ship buries its shame quickly, and the crew knows better than to ask questions. But you ask yourself something as you lie awake again, listening to the soft hum of waves and the creak of tired wood. How much longer can this hold? How long until someone snaps and tells the truth, if only to hear it said aloud? You don't know, but you feel it building, like pressure in a sealed barrel. One day, something will crack. And when it does, you'll be ready. Or maybe not. Maybe you'll just close your eyes and pretend it's still night, still silent, still survivable. It's always the pirates that catch you off guard, not for the danger, not for the sudden shift in the wind or the flash of black flags in the distance, but for how strangely at ease they seem. You expect monsters, frothing dogs with daggers in their teeth, but what you find are men who laugh louder, dress brighter, and move through the world as if gravity bothers them less. You hear the stories first, whispered in fear and envy. They marry each other, someone says. No women, so they take vows, like church vows. Another scoffs, but doesn't deny it. A pirate wife, he says, like the words taste bitter and sweet at once. You don't believe it at first. It sounds like legend, the kind of thing men make up when they've had too much salt and too little sleep. But then you reach a port where pirate ships dock and you see it with your own eyes. 2 men walking side by side, hands brushing, sharing a pipe, one resting his head on the other's shoulder as if it were the most natural thing in the world. No sneaking, no shame, just comfort. like a secret long since stopped being a secret. They laugh like men who aren't afraid of being seen. And in that moment, it hits you harder than any storm. This is freedom. Not just from governments or navies or taxes. Freedom from pretending. Freedom from the hollow grin you wear every time you lie about who you miss at night. That's what makes pirates dangerous. Not their cannons, but their refusal to obey the loneliness written into the walls of every other ship. The term is matelotage. You hear it in a tavern first, muttered by an old Caribbean sailor with scars like a map of regret. He says it was a bond, financial, domestic, emotional, between two pirates. They'd share everything: food, loot, even burial rights. Some of these unions lasted years, longer than most marriages back on land. And while historians still argue whether these relationships were romantic, platonic, or somewhere in between, the men who lived them didn't seem to care about definitions. They just needed someone to come home to, even if home was a hammock below deck and a handful of gold coins tucked beneath a rum bottle. You imagine what it would feel like to reach for someone without flinching, without fear of punishment, to carve initials together into a beam, not in secret but as a declaration, to love however you define it and not be asked to explain. That kind of world feels alien and yet tantalizingly close, like land on the horizon. You start looking at your own crewmates differently, not with lust, but with possibility. What if the closeness you've built, the nights you've shared, the pain you've witnessed, what if all of that could be named and not erased? What if it could stay? But on your ship, there's no matelotage. There are only fragments, glances, whispers. Maybe that's why pirates terrify your captain so much, because they represent what he spent his life suppressing. The idea that masculinity can exist without cruelty, that men can choose softness and still survive, still conquer even. You remember a French letter from a pirate named Laurent, who wrote about his brother of the sea, a man he called his heart. When the man died, Laurent reportedly burned part of his own skin, marked it with ink, and buried the symbol with the body. So he takes a part of me into the next world, he wrote. It's not a story you'll find in naval archives, but it's one you'll remember forever. There's an unspoken reverence for pirates among sailors, even the lawful ones. You won't admit it, but when a ship like that sails into port, you watch them, the way they move, the way they laugh. They're not more handsome than your own crew, just more alive. You envy them. You don't want to pillage or burn, but you want whatever it is that lets them walk like the world belongs to them, like they've figured something out that the rest of you haven't. You meet one eventually, not in a fight, not during some bloody raid, but in a quiet back corner of a tavern when both of you are drunk enough to forget what's expected. He introduces himself only as Joss, and he smiles with teeth filed slightly sharp. You think he's joking until he leans in and says, "We make our own rules out there. You should try it." You ask him about matelotage. He shrugs. Some call it marriage. Others call it convenience. Me? I just wanted someone to talk to. Someone who didn't try to kill me when I cried. You don't know how to respond to that. So you just nod. He leans closer. You don't have to stay lonely, you know. That's the lie they sold you. That you've got to suffer to be a man. And just like that, he's gone. Back into the mist of candlelight and shouting and the smell of boiling rum. But his words stay with you. The next day, you're back on your ship. Nothing's changed. The hammocks still sway. The deck still creaks. The food still tastes like wet cardboard. But you walk a little differently. Like maybe you could start seeing this place as something other than a cage. Like maybe, just maybe, the freedom those pirates found isn't just out there, beyond the next wave, but already here, in the small choices you haven't dared to make. That night you carved something into the wall beside your bunk. Not a name, not a symbol, just a small curve, like a wave or a smile, something no one else would recognize. But you'll know. You'll know it's the moment you realized you don't have to keep swallowing your own voice. You can want things. You can remember them. You can carry them, even if you never say their names aloud. There's a quote from Michel Foucault that comes back to you then, one you read in a borrowed book years ago, before the sea claimed your memory. Where there is power, there is resistance. And you think, maybe love, whatever form it takes out here, is resistance. Maybe it always has been. It starts with a whisper, one of those late-night murmurs passed from bunk to bunk, as thin as a breath and just as dangerous. They say someone's carved a woman into the mast. Not just any woman, a beautiful one. Real enough that some men claim she winks. Real enough that others leave scraps of bread at her base like offerings. You don't believe it at first. It sounds like the kind of nonsense bored men invent. But then you see her, and you stop breathing. She's not more than 2 feet tall, etched into the base of the main mast just above eye level. The curves are delicate, hips curved with such grace it almost seems intentional. The lips are parted slightly, and the eyes, well, they don't move. Of course they don't. But they don't not move either. You ask who carved her and no one answers. That's how you know she matters. Because anything that makes men go quiet on a ship like this is sacred. She becomes a figure of comfort, of fantasy, of superstition. A few men begin to touch the wood before bed, not with lust, with reverence, as if by placing their fingers against her hips, they might remember what warmth felt like. And maybe she'll remember them in return. She gets a name eventually. Mira. No one knows who chose it. It just fits. Mira of the mast. Mira the memory. Mira the silent witness to your slow unraveling. Soon, things begin to change. A handkerchief appears, tied around her waist. Then a tiny necklace, fashioned from fish bone and old thread. Someone leaves a flower. Dried. Pathetic. But still, a flower. You watch this shrine grow, this absurd little altar in the middle of a wooden war machine, and you realize you've created a goddess. Not in jest, in desperation. Mira becomes a stand-in for all that's missing. Softness, mercy, the illusion of love. She is not real, but she is necessary. Historians still argue whether these masthead figures were simply artistic flourishes or vessels for displaced desire. Some describe them as fertility charms, meant to guide the ship's virility through the storms. Others claim they're echoes of older pagan sea rituals, when sailors prayed to female spirits to soothe the wrath of the ocean. But none of those theories explain what you see now. A line of grown men brushing their fingers over a piece of carved wood like children in a church. Not because they believe it will save them, but because it makes them feel less alone. Then someone starts talking about sex magic. That's when things get strange. You hear it in the galley first. A man swears he read it in a sailor's grimoire, a black book passed down by a Portuguese smuggler. Said if you whisper your desire into the mast and spill seed nearby, your wishes will be carried to the wind. Someone laughs, but not everyone does. A few days later, someone swears they heard moaning by the mast. Another says the ship picked up speed the very next day. Coincidence? Maybe, maybe not. The sea is a superstitious place. Always has been. When the stars vanish and your compass spins, sometimes belief is all you've got. So it's no surprise when you find someone kneeling beside Mira, whispering in a language you don't recognize, palms red with something that might be blood or wine or both. He doesn't see you. Or maybe he does and doesn't care. You back away. Fast. But the image stays with you. That's when you realize something terrifying. It's not just a carving anymore. It's a need given shape. One night, you wake to find someone standing by Mira, completely still. You can't tell who it is. They're shirtless, murmuring. You close your eyes and pretend to sleep, but your pulse races. The next morning, someone's left a shell at her base. Another has wrapped her in a scarf that reeks of lavender and salt. And someone else, some poor soul with too much time and too little stability, has painted her lips red. With what, you don't ask. There's a story from The Erotic Spirit Through History about monks in the 11th century who claimed their spiritual ecstasy often included visions of heavenly brides, divine women who comforted them in their sleep. Some of these monks claimed to smell their hair, feel their arms. Others swore they woke with scratches. Scholars say it was all symbolic, a coping mechanism for celibacy and isolation. But you're not so sure. You think about Mira, about the way her eyes seem deeper at night. You think about how many hands have touched her, how many whispers she holds. And you wonder if you're worshiping sanity or something far older and darker. There's a fight one day. Two men catch each other kneeling in front of her, each claiming the other disrespected her. A fist cracks a jaw. Blood hits the deck. But no one steps in. Not right away. Because deep down, everyone understands Mira doesn't belong to any one man. She belongs to all of you. To the ship. To the sea. And that makes her dangerous. Because when belief takes shape, it grows teeth. And when longing becomes shared, it can burn through logic like fire through old rope. You start avoiding her, not out of fear, but out of respect. You think about her too often now. She's invaded your dreams. Once you woke up with your hand against the mast, heart pounding. You can't remember why. You're not the only one. A few men keep journals now, private ones. You catch glimpses, drawings, descriptions. Not just of Mira, but of women that don't exist. They're inventing lovers, giving them names, backstories, habits. One guy talks to his imaginary wife every night, says she's waiting at a cottage by the sea. He hums lullabies into the dark and swears she's humming back. Maybe you're all going mad. Maybe that's the point. The sea doesn't give you clarity. It gives you repetition. The same waves, the same work, the same silence. So you build myths. You build gods. You carve your longing into wood and pretend it listens. Because without that, all you have is the ache. And that's too big to carry without breaking. One day, a storm hits. Hard. The mast cracks at the base. Mira splinters. You feel the whole ship jolt, not from the wind, but from the gasp that goes through the crew. No one cries. But no one moves either. Just silence. That night, the captain says nothing about it. The crew eats in silence. A few men disappear below deck and return with bloodied knuckles and swollen eyes. No one knows who hit whom. And maybe that doesn't matter, because what you've lost isn't a piece of wood. It's a vessel, a mirror, a myth, a way to remember what it feels like to be wanted. You keep a piece of her. Everyone does. Tiny fragments of Mira, hidden in pockets, tucked into boots, wrapped in cloth. You touch yours sometimes when no one's looking, and you whisper, not a prayer, not a spell, just a name, just Mira, just enough to remind yourself that for a little while, longing had a shape, and you weren't entirely alone. It always starts with a joke. You keep doing that and you'll go blind. You hear it your first week aboard, tossed off with a chuckle as someone walks past the head, the latrine barely big enough to fit one regret at a time. Everyone laughs, but no one really does. Because behind the joke is the unspoken truth, that on this ship, every man is battling the same war against his own body. You lie in your hammock and think about that war, about how strange it is that something so private, so universal, can become a source of fear. You've watched grown men flinch at the thought of being caught, not by the law, but by the rumor. One whisper of self-abuse, and suddenly you're eating alone. Suddenly your hammock is avoided like a cursed corner. Suddenly the captain starts assigning you extra duties with a look in his eye that says, I know. And yet, everyone does it. They just don't say it. They don't admit it. They bury it beneath layers of bravado and silence and pray the ship swallows the evidence. But the sea has a way of exposing things. One sailor claims he saw lights in the water after a particularly indulgent evening with himself. Says they glowed like fireflies, danced around the hull, then vanished the moment he zipped up. Everyone laughed. Then, a week later, another sailor claimed the same thing. This time, the lights formed a ring. Now no one's laughing. They start talking about the ocean watchers, spirits who guard the sea's purity, punishing those who disrespect it. Old sailor tales, dredged up from the bottom of memory. One says the watchers are women, cursed by their lovers to wander the waves. Another says they're ancient gods with no eyes, just mouths, and they feed on wasted desire. Suddenly, that joke about going blind isn't so funny, because now it has weight. Myth, consequence. Historians still argue whether these maritime superstitions served to control behavior or simply gave shape to guilt. A kind of floating folklore, passed from generation to generation, like salt through blood. In The History of Sexuality, Foucault notes how institutions don't just police bodies, they create the narratives that make self-control seem natural. You think about that a lot as you try to fall asleep, hands clenched at your sides, afraid of what even your thoughts might betray. It's not the fear of punishment that stops you. It's the idea that your desire might have consequences, that you might summon something, break something, invite something aboard that can't be uninvited. You hear of one ship where the captain banned all private relief, posted signs, held lectures, had the surgeon explain how it weakened the mind. Within a month, 3 men had jumped overboard. Another bit his own hand until it bled. One carved a woman's name into his chest with a fishhook. They say repression is discipline, but it feels more like rot, like leaving meat in the sun and pretending it's fresh. You start to wonder if the rules are there to help you, or to test how long it takes before you break. One sailor, Beau, swears he found a cure. He grins as he tells it, eyes bloodshot from too many nights staring at the stars. "All you need is vinegar," he says. "Wipe yourself every night. Keeps the thoughts away." He's dead serious. Another man uses mustard. A third prays, loudly, repetitively. You catch him chanting in Latin at dawn, clutching a rosary so tight his fingers turn white. Faith becomes a kind of abstinence here. Not a salvation, but a distraction. Something to hold while the nights grow longer and your dreams grow louder. And those dreams, they don't play fair. They twist. They lure. You dream of a woman one night, just her back turned, naked in candlelight, and when she finally turns, it's your bunkmate's face smiling back. You wake up sweating, sick, confused. You don't sleep the rest of the night, because the dream isn't the problem. It's how good it felt. How natural. Like the mind has started reprogramming itself, taking whatever fragments it can and stitching them into something that feels close enough to comfort. And that terrifies you more than anything. Because if your own mind can betray you, what else do you have? You hear another rumor. This one about a sailor who, unable to bear the weight of his desire, took a piece of whalebone and fashioned a device, something he could hide, use, and destroy. They called it the Bone Wife. No one ever saw it, but everyone talked about it. One man swore he heard it humming during storms. Another claimed it went missing the night before a lightning strike hit the bow. They say the sea took it back. That she doesn't like substitutes. That if you try to cheat longing, she makes you pay. There's a moment one afternoon, just a regular day, sun high, sails full, when you catch sight of a crewmate standing alone, staring at his hands. Not doing anything. Just staring. For almost 15 minutes. You ask him later what he was thinking. He shrugs. Just wondering if they're mine. You laugh at first, then stop. because you get it. When everything else is taken from you, privacy, softness, even the right to miss someone, your own body becomes suspect. A traitor, a stranger. In Sex with Kings, there's a passage about a royal mistress who kept a secret garden just for herself. No visitors, no guards, just a space where she could be. You think about that garden often. What it would feel like to have a space where you didn't have to pretend, where your hands didn't have to lie. But there are no gardens here. Only rusted metal, soaked canvas, and the quiet sound of need echoing down narrow halls. You start counting things, not days or meals. Incidents. Times when someone gets caught. Times when someone whispers too loud. Times when a man vanishes for 10 minutes and returns with guilt in his eyes. You keep a mental tally, not to judge, just to remind yourself that you're not alone. That this pressure isn't yours alone to carry. That everyone's pretending, everyone's fighting, and some are losing. One night you find a poem scratched into the wall near the head. Just 5 words. The wind knows I weep. You don't know who wrote it, but you touch the words, trace them with your fingertip like a prayer, because whoever wrote that, they understand. They've been where you are, still are. And in that moment, the ship feels just a little less cruel. The next day, a sailor is flogged. No reason given, just indecency. The crew doesn't ask, doesn't look. But you know what happened. Everyone does. And as you watch him bleed onto the deck, you feel something shift. Not rage, not sorrow, just numbness. Because if survival means erasing yourself, what's left when you finally get to land? The sea doesn't answer. She just rolls beneath you, endless and indifferent. And you hold your breath for the 100th time, hoping the storm in your own chest won't make waves strong enough to throw you over. You don't remember when the sheep arrived, but you remember the silence. A crew that never shuts up, men who whistle, spit, curse, sing, suddenly went quiet the moment that animal was led up the gangplank. She had soft white fleece, dirt in her wool, and wide, stupid eyes that blinked too slowly. For milk, someone said. She'll be good for cheese. But no one believed it. Not really. Because by the 3rd day, she had a name. Not one of those ironic names sailors give, like Captain or Dinner. No, they called her Annabelle. And when men start giving animals real names on a ship like this, it's not about sustenance. It's about something else entirely. You feel it in the way some of the younger crew look at her. Not with lust, not yet, but with longing, with softness. As if she's some strange ambassador from a world they can't remember, one where life wasn't this brutal. It starts as a joke, of course. Someone says Annabelle's got better eyes than his last girl. Another says she listens better too. The laughter is sharp, edged with something darker. You see one sailor stroke her ear a little too slowly. Another lingers while feeding her grain. You try to tell yourself it's nothing, that your mind is corrupted from too many weeks at sea. But you know the signs, the silence, the private jokes, the tension that grows slowly like mold. Historians still argue whether the presence of animals aboard ships was purely practical or deeply psychological. Sure, goats, pigs, and chickens provided milk, meat, and eggs. But why the names? Why the tenderness? Why the odd cases where entire crews refused to slaughter a single goat, letting her live out the whole voyage like a mascot? Some scholars suggest these animals became avatars for everything missing: femininity, innocence, softness. Others point to darker theories, ones whispered in old docks and forgotten prisons, that when human touch becomes forbidden, even repugnant, desire leaks into stranger places. There's a log from a whaling ship in the 18th century that notes peculiar attachments formed between a sailor and a sheep. The captain dismissed it as bachelor loneliness. But a later entry records a crew mutiny when the sheep was found injured. The man was beaten half to death. Not because of what he did, necessarily, but because he shattered the illusion. He reminded the others what their silence was shielding. That's the risk of these creatures. They're too innocent to carry the weight sailors hang on them. They break under it. And when they do, something in the men breaks too. You remember when someone, no one admits who, shaved Annabelle's name into her flank with a piece of broken glass? Just the first 3 letters, A-N-N. She limped for 2 days. The mood on the ship turned sour. Meals were eaten in silence. No one touched her after that. She huddled near the water barrels, flinching from every step. A few days later, she was gone. Fell overboard, someone said. No one believed it, but no one asked. That's how it works out here. You pretend not to see what the dark makes men capable of. You pretend the sea washes it all away. But the sea never forgets. She just hides things, buries them under waves and years until they surface again as stories. You hear about ships that carried monkeys dressed as women, about pigs in dresses paraded for laughs, then kept behind locked doors. You want to think it's just myth, that men don't fall that far. But you know better now, because it's not about sex. Not really. It's about the ache, the unbearable weight of longing, the need to be near something soft, something that doesn't laugh or punish or judge. You once heard a carpenter on another ship made a wooden doll with breasts and hips and even a carved mouth. A woman you can't lose, he called it. He was found dead 2 weeks later, the doll split down the middle, floating beside him. Cause of death? Unknown. Maybe he jumped. Maybe he slipped. Maybe the sea couldn't bear the competition. There's a ritual some ships whisper about, called the midnight offering. You're not sure if it's real, but you've heard the details more than once. On nights when the moon is full, a man lays something at the base of the mast. Food, cloth, hair, even blood. Something that once belonged to a woman. Then he whispers a name. Not always a real one. Sometimes just a name he's made up. And for one night, he pretends she's there. Not in body, but in spirit. He speaks to her, tells her what the ship won't let him say. That he misses her, that he's scared, that he doesn't know if he'll ever be whole again. Then he waits for the sea to answer. They say sometimes the waves grow calm. Sometimes a gust of wind comes from nowhere. And sometimes nothing happens at all. You try it once. You wait until the others are asleep. You tear a piece from a letter you keep hidden, the one that smells faintly of lavender and mildew. You fold it small, place it by the mast, and whisper her name. Not someone you knew, just someone you imagined. She never answers. But you sleep better that night. In The Erotic Spirit, Through History, there's a passage on medieval anchorites, men and women who walled themselves inside tiny cells beside churches, cut off from the world, surrounded only by silence. Some claimed to see visions, others went mad, and some wrote the most beautiful, aching love letters to a god they weren't sure existed. You think about that now. How the ship feels like a cell. How the ocean is your monastery. How every whispered name is a prayer you're not sure anyone hears. After Annabelle, there are no more animals. The captain forbids it. No mascots, he says. No distractions. But it's too late. The damage is done. Something in the crew shifts. A kind of collective guilt. A shame that sticks to the hull like barnacles. Men get quieter. Fights get meaner. You hear someone cry one night, not from pain, just from whatever's left when the last illusion is gone. You hold the letter close now. You read it less, but carry it more. It's become a relic, a reminder, not of love, but of the idea of love, of a world where touch didn't mean punishment, where need wasn't a crime. You think of Annabelle sometimes, not as a sheep, but as a symbol, of what happens when men try to force tenderness into places that can't hold it. And the sea? She keeps rolling, unbothered. She doesn't care what you've done. She doesn't care what you've lost. She just waits. Patient. Eternal. Listening. You hear the whistle crack through the air, and everyone freezes. Not because they don't know what's coming, but because they do. Discipline. That's what they call it. But the word is too clean, too polished. What happens next is something older, something deeper. You watch as the bosun steps forward, face like granite, his whip already coiled. A sailor stands in the middle of the deck, shirt stripped, wrists bound. He doesn't beg. He doesn't speak. He just waits. The charge? Gross indecency. No one says what that means, but everyone knows. Maybe he looked too long. Maybe he touched the wrong shoulder. Maybe he cried out in his sleep and someone heard the wrong name. Doesn't matter now. The verdict is already carved into the rhythm of the crew's breathing. The first lash sounds like canvas ripping. The second lands deeper. By the third, you stop counting. You tell yourself this is about order, about maintaining respect. But deep down, you know what this really is. Performance. This is a show, a message written in blood. You've seen floggings before, men punished for theft, for fighting, for disobedience. But this is different. This isn't about crime. It's about containment. The body on the deck isn't just being punished. It's being erased, rewritten, turned into an object lesson, a human sacrifice to the god of repression. Historians still argue whether naval punishments served justice or merely reinforced hierarchy. Some suggest these spectacles were designed to bond the crew through shared horror, like a cult. Others say they were necessary. Hard lives require hard rules. But nothing feels necessary when the man's back splits and you see raw muscle. Nothing feels just when another man covers his mouth to keep from vomiting. And yet, the crew watches. All of them. Eyes wide, jaws tight. Because you're not allowed to look away. Looking away means you sympathize. Looking away means you see something human in what's being destroyed. So you stare, and when it's over, you pretend it didn't affect you. You eat, you work, you laugh at jokes that aren't funny. Because that's the real punishment, not the whip, but the silence that follows. There's a rumor that on some ships floggings were requested, voluntarily. A kind of twisted confession, a cleansing of guilt. One man in the archives wrote that after being caught in improper congress with another sailor, he asked for 30 lashes rather than be transferred. I'd rather bleed here than rot somewhere else, he wrote. At least here, they still look at me. You wonder what that means. To be punished and still seen. To be broken and still counted. You remember a passage from Foucault, how power isn't just about force, but about visibility. Who gets watched? Who gets silenced? Who gets displayed? The ship is a perfect machine of power. Everything visible. Everything judged. And nowhere to hide. So desire becomes the most dangerous thing of all. Not because it's wrong, but because it's uncontainable. You can bind a man's hands, lash his back, tie his mouth, but you can't chain his thoughts, and that terrifies them. After the flogging, the man is left tied to the rail, not for more punishment, but for display. A warning. His eyes are open, but he doesn't see anything. You walk past him later, and he flinches when the wind hits his skin. That night, no one speaks his name. He is alive, but erased. A ghost made of bruises and memory. One sailor, a quiet one named Eli, stops showing up to meals. You find him curled behind the gunpowder barrels one night, muttering to himself. "I didn't mean it," he whispers. "It was just a dream." You try to comfort him, but he pulls away. You don't push, because you know exactly what he means. Sometimes it's not even what you do. Sometimes it's just what you feel, and that's enough to damn you. You hear of a ship off the coast of West Africa where the captain implemented a rule: no men could share hammocks. At all. Every man had to sleep at least one pace apart. He called it a moral safeguard. But within a month, 2 men were found dead. One hanged himself with his belt, the other jumped from the crow's nest. Some say it was a lover's pact, others say it was grief. The records list both deaths as accidental. You know better. There's an old ritual in some parts of the Mediterranean, flogging as flirtation. In certain festivals, men lash each other lightly as part of courtship. It's symbolic, intimate, a shared endurance. You think about that as you watch a crewmate bandage the flogged man's wounds. He does it carefully, tenderly, as if every touch is an apology the ship won't let him say aloud. The next day, the crew is different. Not louder, not angrier, just tighter, like threads pulled taut. A man accidentally knocks over a mug, and two others nearly start a fight. Another sings a bawdy song and is met with silence. You feel it building, that tension, that storm. You know something has to give. That night, someone carves words into the mast. Just 3. Let me be. By morning, they're sanded off. No one asks who did it, but everyone knows, because at some point, we've all wanted to carve those words into something, into wood, into skin, into memory. The flogged man survives, barely. He starts speaking again, but only in short bursts. He never raises his eyes, never laughs. One day, you find him staring out at the sea, humming a lullaby. You ask him where he learned it. He says nothing, just keeps humming. You stay with him, not to talk, just to share the silence. You start to notice how many men hum now, old tunes, forgotten ballads, songs their mothers sang. It's not music. It's a shield, a way to keep the ache from spilling out. In Sex with Kings, there's a story about a ruler who flogged himself before every lover, not for penance, but for purity. He believed pain cleansed desire. You wonder if that's what the ship believes too, that if it punishes enough, the hunger will disappear. But it doesn't. It just changes shape, grows sharper, hides deeper. You dream of the flogging, not as a witness, but as the one tied to the rail. And when you wake, your skin burns, not from pain, but from absence. The absence of touch, the absence of permission. You begin to understand something terrible. Sometimes, pain becomes the only form of intimacy allowed. The only contact that doesn't get punished. The only moment where skin meets skin without a mask. And that's the real cruelty. Not the blood, not the scars, but the way it teaches you to crave the very thing that breaks you. There's a book hidden in the surgeon's quarters. Thin, leather-bound, and smelling faintly of ink and secrets. You weren't meant to find it. No one is. But on a quiet afternoon, while fetching salve for a splinter, you catch a glimpse and pull it free. It's not a log or a medical manual. It's a trial ledger. One that the captain probably thought long forgotten. Inside, neat and brutal, are names. Dates. Charges. Punishments. The phrase, crimes of unnatural affection, repeats over and over like a chorus. And beside some names, those without punishments, you see the word dismissed, written in a hand that's tried too hard to forget. You sit there, pages trembling in your fingers, realizing you're holding the record of an invisible war. The one fought between desire and decree, between what men are and what the Royal Navy pretends they are not. The Naval Code is clear. Article 29. If any person in the fleet shall commit the unnatural and detestable sin of buggery or sodomy with man or beast, he shall suffer death without mercy. No gray, no debate, no appeal, just finality. But what they never write is how often those trials fell apart. How many captains refused to prosecute. How many witnesses suddenly couldn't remember. Because when the man accused is your best gunner, or the only one who can read, or the same one who saved you from drowning during last month's storm, sometimes you look away. Not out of kindness, but survival. Historians still argue whether the Royal Navy's crackdown on same-sex relations was genuine moral outrage or just another tool of power. Some say the trials were rare, symbolic, more about fear than enforcement. Others point to the records, fragmented, half erased, but damning. Whole crews executed, names struck from payroll, journals where officers hint at irregular attachments between crewmen, always followed by a sudden transfer or an accident at sea. You read about one such case, HMS Vigilant, 1743. A court-martial held at anchor in Barbados. 3 men accused. Only one confessed. Said he'd fallen in love. Not lust. Love. He was hanged within 48 hours. The other 2 were flogged, then forced to sleep in opposite corners of the ship for the rest of the voyage. The logs say they served out their duties with discipline. Nothing more. But in the margins of an officer's journal, someone wrote, "They still looked at each other." You close the book quickly. Your hands shake. Not from fear, from recognition. You've seen those looks. You've had them. And you know that if someone ever wrote your name in this ledger, it would not be for theft or drunkenness or insubordination. It would be for a glance held half a second too long. Back on deck, you move differently. Not cautious, calibrated. You watch for signs, not just the ones that reveal who might betray you, but the ones that whisper, "Me too." A brush of fingers when passing the rigging, a shared smile in the galley, a sentence that stops just short of confession. These are the codes of survival, and they are not written in any ledger. There's a man, Jem, who always whistles when he's nervous. High-pitched, tuneless, constant. He was once caught with a letter in his bunk. It was unsigned, just a single line. "I remember the stars in your hair." They never found out who wrote it, or if they did, they didn't say. Jem stopped whistling after that, and he stopped smiling. But you still see him, every night, standing at the rail, eyes scanning the stars like he's waiting for something to blink back. Another time, you see the captain drop a hand on a sailor's shoulder. Firm, familiar, the kind of touch that speaks more than authority. The sailor stiffens, then relaxes. And for one sliver of a moment, the mask slips. You see something soft pass between them. Then it's gone. Just another piece of silence added to the pile. You remember something from Sex with Kings, where Eleanor Herman describes how royal courts were never as straight-laced as they appeared. Kings with favorites, queens with maids who stayed too long. Power and desire have always danced together. But out here on the sea, the dance is more dangerous. There's no palace to hide in, just rope and wind and rumors. Someone once said the ship is a floating confessional, but out here, confession kills. So you lie, even to yourself. You say you miss the smell of flowers. You say you crave the warmth of a woman's breath. You describe her in detail, curves, lips, laughter. But in your dreams, it's always someone else. A voice deeper than yours, a touch that isn't dainty. And you wake, ashamed, not because of the dream, but because of how badly you wish it wasn't one. There's a night where a storm hits sudden and vicious. Men are scrambling. Rain lashes like chains. You're holding the line with another sailor, Rook, a man with shoulders like walls and eyes that never flinch. Lightning cracks. For a moment, everything is white. You're thrown into him. Your hands grab his chest. He doesn't pull away, just holds you there for a beat too long. Later, when the storm passes, he says nothing. Neither do you. But something has changed. Not spoken, just understood. You begin to write. Nothing grand, just lines scratched into a corner of your bunk. The wind touches me the way I wish you would. Is it wrong to need the warmth, even when it comes from the wrong side? You never sign them, never speak them aloud, but you write. Because if the ship is a sentence, you need a comma, a pause to remember who you are when you're not pretending. One night, you catch a crewmate trying to burn a letter. His hands shake. The ink runs as it curls. You see only 2 words before the flame eats them. My love. He meets your eyes, doesn't speak, just nods. And in that silence, you hear everything. You start to see the ship for what it is, not just a machine of war or a vessel of discipline, but a stage, a place where every man plays a role, the faithful, the crude, the silent, the monster. But somewhere beneath the roles are real people, real aches, real secrets. And every now and then one of those secrets glints through the cracks, like a star refusing to go out. In a journal tucked beneath your hammock, you write a name, one you've never said aloud, one you haven't had the courage to give to the feeling that's been growing in your chest like moss. You write it once, then again, just to see it, to own it. And the sea? She says nothing. She just sways, like always, listening. You hear the name whispered like a legend, the bachelor ships, always with a smirk, a shake of the head, a look that says everything and nothing. 3 years at sea, not a single woman. That's how the story always starts. Sometimes it's said with awe, sometimes with revulsion, but always, always, it ends with silence, as if whatever happened aboard those vessels can't be repeated, not because it's shameful, but because it's sacred. Or maybe because it's simply too complicated to explain. You start to dig through old logs, through hearsay and memory, and what you find is something stranger than myth. Ships like the HMS Endurance, the Discovery, the Terror, ironically named Gently Haunted. Crewed by men who knew, before they even left port, that there would be no shore leave, no brothels, no ports of reprieve, just ice, water, and each other. You try to imagine it, not just the cold or the isolation, but the absence of the idea of women. No hope, no fantasy, no whisper of soft arms waiting on the next horizon. Just men, and days that stretch until time loses its meaning. How do you fill that void? How do you survive it? Historians still argue whether these bachelor ships fostered greater camaraderie or deeper psychological fractures. Some point to the meticulous journals kept by officers, full of weather and work, suspiciously void of anything emotional. Others highlight the quiet tenderness threaded between the lines, entries that linger on a crewmate's laugh, on the way someone looked under starlight, on the act of sharing tea in a cabin no wider than a grave. One journal from the Resolution includes a recurring phrase, "He warmed the room with more than the fire." They never name the he. They never have to. There's something almost monastic about these ships, something holy and tragic. You read about rituals, shared songs, bedtime poems, invented games. One man wrote a limerick every night and read it aloud before lights out. Another carved miniature chess pieces from whalebone and gave them as gifts. You start to wonder if these gestures were just boredom or if they were love in disguise. Because when the usual rules of romance are stripped away, affection begins to wear new clothes. You come across a log from a captain who noted coldly, certain emotional dependencies have developed among the junior officers. No elaboration, just that sentence. But you know what it means. It means someone held someone else too long. It means someone cried and wasn't laughed at. It means men began to look at each other not as comrades or subordinates, but as lifelines. And in a place where death is closer than sunlight, that kind of intimacy is more dangerous than any mutiny. You hear stories from those who returned, the way they'd sit too close to each other in taverns, the way they touched shoulders when speaking, unconsciously. Some never married. Some did, then divorced quickly. One ship's doctor was found years later living with a man he'd served with. "We were just friends," he said. But the letters between them, found after both their deaths, tell a different story. They speak of dreams, of longing, of promises made in storms and kept in silence. There's a passage in The Erotic Spirit Through History about soldiers who, after years on campaign, couldn't return to civilian touch. They found the softness of women strange, the smell of perfume too sweet. They missed the rough, calloused comfort of brotherhood, the quiet ritual of shared sleep without shame. You begin to understand. The sea changes you, not just your body, your mind, your needs. It peels away what society taught you and leaves only instinct. And sometimes, that instinct wants something other than what the world says you should. You talk to an older sailor one day, face like driftwood, hands always moving, even when still. He tells you about a voyage he took in his youth, 2 years in the Arctic, 40 men, no women. He doesn't speak much about what happened, but he does say this: "There was a man who sang to me every night until I fell asleep. When I asked him why, he said he didn't want me to dream alone." The old sailor looks away then, blinking too hard. I've never been sung to since. You find that story more beautiful than any poem. Later that night, you lie awake thinking about those men. The ones who survived not because they were hard, but because they allowed softness to grow like moss in the cracks of their steel. The ones who loved without needing to say it. Who shared everything because there was nothing else. You wonder what those relationships looked like. Were there kisses? Letters? Was there jealousy? Or was it something quieter, deeper, a kind of spiritual twinning, a mutual understanding that what they had only existed because the world around them had dissolved? You remember a moment on your own ship, a storm, violent and sudden. You and another sailor clinging to the same rope, faces inches apart. He shouted something. You laughed. Then the sky cracked open. You were soaked, freezing, alive. And for one heartbeat, the space between you felt electric. Not sexual, just human, real. As if, for that second, you were the only two people the sea allowed to matter. You write about it in your journal, not in detail, just a line. Sometimes survival looks like a shared rope in the dark. It doesn't feel like enough, but it's honest. And that's more than most men ever write. You learn later about a shipwreck in the early 1800s. The Cumberland. They found 2 skeletons clutching each other. One had a ring on a chain, no names, no log entries, but someone had buried them together. A makeshift cairn of coral and driftwood. The last kindness one could offer when the world had already turned away. You think about all the men who never got to say goodbye, who came home to wives who didn't understand why they stared at other men's backs with a kind of hunger that had nothing to do with flesh, who drank too much, who went back to sea not for money, but for the only kind of closeness they knew how to survive. You realize something terrible and beautiful all at once. Out here, love doesn't need a name. It just needs a place to live. And sometimes, that place is the space between 2 hammocks. A song hummed in the dark. A hand on your shoulder when the world is falling apart. You close your eyes, and for the first time in weeks, you sleep without dreaming. It begins with a shimmer, a glint of silver just beneath the surface, moving like a thought you almost remember. The ocean is flat and still, the kind of calm that makes men nervous, like something's listening. And then someone gasps, leans over the rail and points. "Did you see that?" he whispers, voice trembling like the taut lines overhead. Another joins, then another, and you lean too, breath shallow, eyes scanning the blue until you see it. Long hair drifting just under the water, pale shoulders, a tail you swear flicks once, disappears. The word slips out like steam from a boiling pot. Mermaid. Everyone laughs at first, nervously, then again, louder. But behind every laugh is something sharper, a wanting so thick it hums between the teeth. Because after 90 days at sea, the mind starts turning absence into presence, need into vision, memory into hallucination. You've heard of it before. Sailors who swear they saw women dancing on the waves, Sirens, sea nymphs, wet-haired goddesses who sang in voices that sounded suspiciously like someone you once loved. You chalk it up to hunger, sunstroke, boredom. But when it happens to you, it doesn't feel like madness. It feels like mercy. She appears during night watch, not all at once. First her song, drifting low through the rigging like a lullaby from someone who knows your name. Then her hands, just the shape of them, pressing against the hull like she's searching for you specifically. You blink, shake your head, look again. Nothing. But the chill down your spine doesn't go away. Historians still argue whether these visions were mass delusions or collective storytelling rituals, a way to give shape to the madness that brews inside a man when his only intimacy is with the wind and his own hand. Some say they were lies told to make other men jealous. Others claim these stories were warnings, parables to scare young sailors into staying chaste or sane. But some journals, the ones never meant for eyes beyond the page, describe things that feel too vivid to be fiction. "She kissed me through the dream," one sailor wrote in 1781. "Her lips were salt, her voice like home. I woke hard and ashamed, but I loved her anyway." You remember a passage from the Kama Sutra? Yes, even that ancient book of earthly delights knew what distance could do to a man. It warned of phantom lovers, the images the mind conjures when flesh is too far and the soul too empty. The remedy? Imagination, carefully wielded. Fantasies shaped like prayers. You laugh bitterly, because that's exactly what the ship becomes. A cathedral of illusions. You don't pray to gods. You pray to memories, dreams, silhouettes of women who may never have existed but still linger on the inside of your eyelids every time you try to sleep. The strange part? It starts happening to everyone. The carpenter claims he saw a naked woman on the bowsprit, her arms spread like wings. The cook says he heard laughter in the water. One man, soaked in sweat and shaking, swears he spent 20 minutes speaking to his wife through the lantern flame. "She told me to come home," he says, voice cracking. "Told me she's waiting." No one mocks him. Not anymore. Because by now, we all want to believe something is waiting for us out there. Something with arms and breath and a name. There's an old belief among sailors that ships attract spirits, especially lonely ones. That the sea is full of souls looking for bodies to comfort. Some say they take the shape of past lovers. Others say they shift form depending on what you miss most. You begin to wonder, are these visions born of madness, or are they something more? The sea has always been a place of transformation, of baptism and drowning. What if it doesn't just claim your body, but your desire too? One night during a storm, you swear you see her again. Not clearly, just her shape in the lightning. She's standing on the mast, arms outstretched, mouth open in silent song. You stumble, call out. Someone grabs you before you fall overboard. "Easy," they say. "She's not yours." The words sting, because you believed she might be. For a moment. For just long enough to forget where you are. After that, the ship changes. Men grow quieter, less crude. They don't talk about prostitutes or port girls. They talk about her, always her, the one they saw, the one they touched in sleep, the one who whispered secrets they can't repeat. It becomes a shared hallucination, a mythology, the woman of the wake, the ghost wife, the lady of the bow. You give her names because naming gives control, because it's better than admitting you've started to forget what a real woman feels like. There's a younger sailor, barely 18, who starts sculpting, bits of rope, splinters, wax. He makes faces, breasts, hips, tiny statues he lines up along the edge of his hammock. "So I don't forget," he says. "So I remember how curves go." Some laugh, some steal the figures, but most just nod. Because they know. They're forgetting too. You once read that when prisoners are isolated long enough, they start creating entire families in their heads. Wives, children, Sunday dinners. You think that's what the ship is doing to you, turning your mind into a memory palace with no real memories, just composites, fragments of voices, snippets of songs, smells you can't quite place, and at the center of it all, her. Not one woman, all women. The idea of her, the antidote to your withering sense of self. In Sex with Kings, there's a line about how power feeds desire, how the more inaccessible a person becomes, the more intense the longing. That's what you feel now. Not lust, not even affection. Worship. She's become your holy grail, your lighthouse, your one true north in a world where compasses spin and stars vanish behind clouds. You start seeing her in other places, in the knot of a rope, in the curl of steam from the galley, in the way your crewmate hums a lullaby he claims to have never heard before. She's everywhere and nowhere. She's never touched you, and yet your skin remembers her. You don't tell anyone, not directly, but one night you leave a note pinned to the mast. Just 3 words. I saw her. In the morning, it's gone. No one mentions it. But a week later, another appears. She smiled at me. Then, she asked about you. And so the ship becomes not just a vessel, but a choir. A secret congregation worshiping a shared figment. It's absurd. It's comforting. It's survival. You don't know what she is. Hallucination. Memory. Ghost. You just know that when you close your eyes, she's there. Waiting. Watching. Reminding you that you're still capable of wanting something that doesn't bleed. And somehow that's enough to keep going. It starts with a letter, folded tight, ink faded, edges softened by time and touch. You find it wedged inside a ration tin, long forgotten. You unfold it with trembling fingers, expecting another inventory list or a crude sketch. Instead, it opens with 4 words. My dearest, my only. Your breath catches, because no one writes like that anymore. Not out here. You read it slowly, greedily. It's from a sailor to someone named Daniel. Not a sweetheart, not a brother. Daniel. The letter is full of longing so raw it hurts your chest to read. I miss your voice in the morning, your laugh at dusk. I count the stars not for navigation, but for every hour I've been away from you. And at the end, if they find this, I am already gone. You stare at the paper for a long time, not because it shocks you, but because it doesn't. Because you understand the need to say it, to preserve it, to let the words exist somewhere, even if the world won't allow the love behind them. You fold it back, gently, and tuck it into your own chest pocket, like a talisman. Like proof that what you feel isn't madness, isn't sin, isn't new. You begin noticing the others, noticing their letters. Not the ones they boast about. Those are always performative, crude, filled with tales of barmaids and bosoms. You mean the real ones. The ones written at night when no one's watching. Folded carefully. Tucked into books, beneath pillows, inside boots. Some with names. Others just with you. You realize these are not just love letters. They're lifelines. Threads that connect the men back to something, someone, that reminds them they're more than function, more than uniform, more than hunger. Historians still argue whether sailors formed deep emotional bonds with people back home, or simply fabricated them as mental scaffolding. Some researchers insist these letters were projections, written not to real lovers, but to imaginary ones. Others argue these correspondences reveal a suppressed emotional literacy that couldn't be voiced in public. Whatever the truth, you know this. Every man aboard carries words that never get spoken aloud. That's what makes the letters sacred. They're the real confessions. There's a young sailor, Ellis, who reads his out loud sometimes when he thinks no one's listening. I hope the roses bloomed early this year, he says softly into the dark. I dreamt of your hands, soft and warm and mine. No one teases him. Not anymore. The first time they tried, called him a poet. But he kept reading anyway. Now, no one mocks. Some even linger nearby, pretending to mend boots or polish brass, just to hear a whisper of the life they've forgotten how to miss. One letter floats loose across the deck one morning. You catch it just before it blows away. It's unsigned. It says, "Last night I dreamt you were cold, and I couldn't find the blanket. I wrapped myself around you instead. I hope you felt it, wherever you are." You don't return it. You don't ask who wrote it. You just fold it into your coat pocket beside the others. The collection grows, letter by letter. A secret archive of unspoken want. You think about all the things these men can't say, about the ones who write letters but never send them, about the ones who write letters they'll never be allowed to receive. One sailor, gruff and silent, drinks too much one night and confesses that his letters come back unopened. "She moved," he says. "Didn't tell me. Maybe on purpose." He doesn't cry. He just tears the next one up before he even finishes it. You begin writing your own? At first, they're small things. "I missed you today. The sea was quiet but not kind. I think I saw your eyes in the stars." You don't know who you're writing to, just that you need to. Eventually, you name him. Not someone real, just someone who feels real in your mind. Someone who would have held your hand without shame. Someone who wouldn't laugh at the way your voice shakes when you say the word want. You fold the letters carefully. You never plan to send them. That's not the point. The point is that in the writing, you remember who you are. There's a theory you once heard, that the act of longing reshapes the brain, that when the body is deprived of touch, of love, of voice, it begins to create its own nourishment. Daydreams become vivid. Memory turns technicolor. The past becomes more real than the present. You believe it now. You feel it in your skin, your bones. You are sustained not by food, but by fiction. And that fiction, paradoxically, is what keeps you sane. There's an older man aboard, Grigsby, who never speaks of his past. But one night, drunk on contraband rum, he stares into the sea and mutters, "He smelled like apples." No one responds. But you know that scent will haunt you now. Apples, sweet and distant. A perfume of a life that slipped away. In Sex with Kings, there's a section about secret correspondences between monarchs and lovers. How entire affairs were carried out on paper beneath layers of metaphor and ink. "To hold your gaze is to hold the sun," one queen wrote to her forbidden paramour. You realize the ocean has turned you into royalty of the imaginary. Every letter you write, every phrase you don't dare say aloud, is a jewel placed in a box no one else gets to open. You start exchanging lines with another crewmate, not openly, not signed, just bits of paper tucked under plates, inside boots, slipped into the seams of hammocks. Never direct, always vague. The nights are colder when the stars hide. "I wish I could fall asleep beside someone who knows my name." No confrontation, no confession, just two minds touching without skin. It's enough, for now. One night, you fall asleep with a letter clutched to your chest. In your dream, someone reads it back to you, voice warm, steady, unafraid. When you wake, you swear your name was spoken, but the wind is already sweeping it away. The next morning, you find a letter pinned to the mast, bold, risky. "Whoever you are, I hear you. I feel it too." It's unsigned, but the handwriting is familiar. You don't reply. Not yet. You just stand by it for a moment, reading it again and again until the letters blur. And the sea? She watches. As always. She doesn't speak. But if you listen closely enough, you start to believe she's humming. A lullaby made of ink and silence and the soft ache of words never spoken aloud. You see the whip marks long after they heal. Not the red, not the split skin. Those fade. What stays is the way the men carry themselves afterward. shoulders hunched tighter, eyes that flinch at kindness. The tension that never quite leaves their walk, and sometimes the way they start to pray. Not like they did before, quick, mumbled grace over meals or desperate gasps during storms. No, this is different. This is ritual, repetition, a kind of obsession. You notice one man, Reeve, kneeling behind the barrels every morning before the sun crests the horizon, whispering the same phrase again and again. Burn it out, burn it out, burn it out. You don't ask what he means. You already know. You've seen the guilt on his face after a dream, after a look, after touching his own hand like it wasn't his. There's a kind of religion that grows on ships like this. Not the soft kind, with hymns and forgiveness. The hard kind. The kind that teaches you every desire is a trap, that pain is purification, that if you just deny yourself enough, eventually the hunger will stop. It doesn't. It never does. But men try anyway. They lash their backs in secret with rope ends, kneel on splinters, fast for days on biscuits and water. You find Reeve once scraping his knuckles raw against the deck, whispering something about demons in his chest. You try to pull him away. He jerks back like you've burned him. Don't touch me, he says. I'm not clean. Historians still argue whether the religious fervor aboard long-haul ships was sincere faith or a symptom of mental fracture. Some say these sailors clung to God because he was the only presence that couldn't be taken away. Others say it was guilt, cultivated, institutional, unavoidable. The Bible was everywhere, on every captain's desk, in every officer's quarters, verses used not to comfort, but to condemn. The body is a temple, one chaplain used to say, and you've defiled it with thought alone, as if thinking could send you to hell. And out here, with nothing but time and wind and the ghost of warmth, thinking is all you have. One day, a small wooden cross appears, tied to the mast with a scrap of canvas. No one claims it. But within a week, others begin leaving things around it. Bits of twine, breadcrumbs, carved tokens. A shrine builds itself, quiet and slow, like moss creeping across a stone. It's not sanctioned. The officers don't acknowledge it, but they don't tear it down either, because it's doing something they can't. It's soaking up the ache. Every whispered confession, every silent scream, every ounce of guilt too heavy to carry elsewhere. The cross becomes a scapegoat, a symbol, a mirror, and then a prison. You watch men approach it at night, touch it, murmur into the dark. Some cry, some stay for hours. You pass one man, Hale, whispering a prayer while rubbing his thighs raw with a stiff brush. Make me clean, he says. Make me empty. You can't look away, not because it's grotesque, but because you understand. You've felt the same thing, the shame, the confusion, the craving for absolution that never comes. There's a passage in The History of Sexuality where Foucault talks about how institutions use confession as a form of control, not just punishment, but internal policing. Get someone to believe their thoughts are sin, and they'll do your work for you. That's what's happening now. The crew doesn't need to be watched. They watch themselves. They turn their own desires into crimes and then beg for punishment. It's not justice, it's programming. You catch yourself praying sometimes, not to any god you know, just to something. A whisper in the wind, a vague hope that someone, somewhere, sees you and doesn't turn away. You pray to sleep without dreaming. You pray for the ache to quiet down. You pray not to see Reeve again, curled in the dark, beating his chest like it's a drum of demons. One night he collapses, mid-deck. No storm, no fight, just drops. When the surgeon checks him, he finds nothing physically wrong. No infection, no fever, just exhaustion, starvation. His lips are cracked, his hands blistered, his voice gone. They put him in the sick bay. He stares at the ceiling, doesn't blink, doesn't move. You sit beside him once, reading aloud from a sea manual just to fill the silence. When you pause, he speaks, so softly you almost miss it. "He touched my back once," he says. "Just touched. And I thought I'd die from the kindness." You don't respond. You just keep reading. After that, something shifts. Not in him, in the others. Like his collapse gave them permission. Men start writing psalms in the margins of their logs. Not biblical ones, personal ones. One says, "Blessed be the silence between two shared breaths." Another reads, "Forgive me, for I missed the way he laughed." You find these lines carved into wood, inked onto cloth, scratched into tin plates. A new language, raw and unsure, but deeply honest. Still, for every man who softens, another hardens. There's the zealot, Pierce, who starts leading morning prayer like a drill sergeant. "Lust is the rot of the soul," he shouts. "Cut it out before it cuts you down." He slaps one sailor across the face for giggling during a verse. Another, he makes kneel on the hot deck for 3 hours for looking at another man with want. It becomes a spectacle, a new kind of punishment, holier, sharper. The officers say nothing. Maybe they approve. Maybe they're too afraid to step in. You find Reeve in the corner again, weeks later, drawing with a piece of charcoal. Not words, images. A hand touching another hand. A man resting his head in someone's lap. A pair of figures curled together under a tattered blanket. Not erotic. Just gentle. You crouch beside him. "Do you still pray?" you ask. He shrugs. "I pray they were real," he says. "The feelings, the touches. I pray it meant something." You don't reply. You just place your hand on his for a moment. He doesn't flinch this time. In The Erotic Spirit Through History, there's a section on self-flagellation as spiritual ecstasy. How pain can blur into transcendence. You think about that as you watch a sailor tie knots into a rope and whip his back in perfect rhythm, like he's trying to beat the desire out. But maybe he's not trying to kill it. Maybe he's trying to transform it. Make it something holy, something allowed. That's what religion becomes on this ship. Not salvation, but survival. A way to hold the ache without being consumed by it. A way to believe you're still human, even as the sea peels your skin from your soul. And you? You still write. Still tuck your letters into the beams. Still dream. But now, when you pray, you don't ask to be forgiven. You ask to be remembered. You ask that when you're finally home, or whatever's left of you is, someone will look at the salt in your hair and the silence in your eyes and say, "He loved, he hurt, he survived." And the sea, she rolls beneath it all, steady as scripture, patient as penance, listening. The smell hits you before anything else, sharp, fishy, and strangely sweet, like something once alive now trying very hard not to be. It's coming from the galley, where a sailor named Kit is hunched over a bucket, muttering to himself and crushing what looks like oysters with a rusted spoon. "It's for the blood," he says when you ask. Keeps the humors in balance. He holds up a handful of grayish paste, proud and hopeful. "Rub it on your chest. Feel the fire come back." You blink, you laugh. Then you stop laughing because he's not joking, and neither are the others. It starts small. These little rituals of desperation. Someone chewing raw garlic cloves before bed. Another man dousing his toes in brandy, claiming it draws the lust down. One sailor ties a leather strap around his thigh, tight enough to leave a bruise, then insists it keeps his urges focused. And then there's the shark oil. Always the shark oil. Said to strengthen the soul, whatever that means. The first time you try it, you nearly gag. The second time, you swear your heart beats harder. By the third, you've convinced yourself it's working. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, psychologically. And maybe that's the point. Historians still argue whether sailors believed in these so-called sea aphrodisiacs, or just needed the illusion of control. Whether these rituals were born of ancient medicine or maritime madness. But you know how quickly superstition becomes sanity when nothing else is working. How easily a smear of pickled herring paste becomes a cure for emptiness. And how, in the absence of women, even a myth can feel like medicine. Someone mixes crushed barnacles with rum. Another steeps dried seaweed in vinegar and rubs it on his temples. For stamina, he swears. You ask if it works. He just winks. Later that night, he weeps into his blanket, but he says he slept better. Maybe that's enough. In the erotic spirit through history, there's a whole chapter on folk remedies. Dried tiger testes in China, powdered pearls in India, the Romans with their love of wine mixed with ash and honey, all designed to chase the same thing: vitality, desire, connection. Out here, the ingredients change, but the ache remains the same. The men chew salt-soaked herbs, sleep with stones tied to their ankles, rub crushed coral between their teeth. Each action absurd, each one sacred, each one a desperate attempt to trick the body into feeling wanted again. There's an old man, Dobbs, who claims to know real magic. Says he learned it from a Haitian priestess in a port town years ago. He carries a pouch of something black and grainy. Sea ash, he calls it. You don't ask where he got it. He tells men to sprinkle it in their boots and speak the name of the one they miss most. You watch them do it, one after another, eyes closed, whispering into their shoes like children pretending their feet can take them home. You try it once, not because you believe, but because you're tired of not believing. You whisper a name you don't even know is real. And when you walk the deck that night, your steps feel lighter. The ache doesn't vanish, but it shifts, like it's been moved somewhere else, somewhere manageable. And then there's the fruit. Citrus, when it appears, is like gold. But some say lemons do more than cure scurvy. She smells like this, a sailor mutters, peeling one and breathing in like he's inhaling a memory. You start keeping peels under your pillow. When you press your face to them, your dreams soften. You see fingers instead of storms, laughter instead of lightning. You write all of this down in your journal, not because it makes sense, but because it makes you feel less alone. Because if the shark oil, the lemon peels, the whispered names, the fish paste, if they help even a little, then they're not ridiculous. They're necessary. You remember a line from the Kama Sutra: what the body cannot receive, the mind must imagine. You think about that every time you sip the bitter teas someone brews from dried leaves scraped off the hull. Every time you rub salt behind your ears before bed, because someone swore it brings gentler dreams. There's a night when Kit, yes, Oyster Kit, tries something new. A mixture of boiled squid ink and powdered cinnamon. You smear it on your sternum, he explains, eyes gleaming. It calls your desires to the surface. You ask what happened when he tried it. He grins. I dreamed I was being held, not just touched, held. The others laugh, but you don't. Because for all its absurdity, there's something devastatingly honest about that image, about dreaming of being held like it matters. Another sailor mixes his own sweat with rum and calls it the siren's kiss. He dabs it behind his ears. The smell is horrific. But he walks taller afterward. You see him smiling to himself later, whispering into the wind. Maybe it's a placebo. Maybe it's madness. Maybe it's hope. You remember an entry from a lost sailor's journal, one that never made it into official records. I carved a woman from driftwood, then kissed her on the forehead every night. I believed she listened. That was enough to keep me breathing. You wonder what happened to that carving. If it still floats somewhere, lips worn smooth by time and tide. One night, the crew builds a small fire on deck, not for warmth, for ritual, a ceremony of remembrance. They throw in orange peels, curls of hair, scraps of letters, drops of old oil. The smell is strange. Sweet. Familiar. It smells like memory, like the echo of touch. No one speaks. They just sit, silent, eyes locked on the flame. You think this might be the most honest moment the crew has ever shared. Afterward, you lie in your hammock and feel something settle in your chest. Not peace, not quite, but a lull. Like the sea has paused her howling, like the ache has agreed to give you one night off. You think about how much of desire is chemical, electrical, molecular, and how much of it is memory. You think about how, in the absence of bodies, the mind makes substitutes, rituals, sense, illusions, and you wonder if that's not a weakness, but a strength. A survival tool older than any ship, any book, any law. Because out here, you don't get what you want. You get what you can hold together with string, fish guts, and belief. And tonight you believe, just enough. You hear the first rumor below deck, whispered through cracked lips and careful glances. There's a woman aboard. At first, everyone laughs, because of course there isn't. There never is. It's one of the oldest naval laws, etched into the spine of maritime tradition. No women on ships. They're bad luck. They're distractions. They're the source of storms and madness. But the whisper spreads. And like most rumors at sea, it sticks. Not because it's likely, but because you want it to be true. Then you see her. Not all at once. Just a glimpse. A shape moving too gracefully. Hips that sway too naturally. Hair tucked under a hat that doesn't quite hide its length. You tell yourself it's imagination, that the long voyage is playing tricks. But a week later you hear a laugh in the shadows. Soft, low, unmistakably feminine. You freeze. You aren't alone. The truth unravels slowly. She's not a ghost. She's real. Her name, if it's even her real name, is Marin. She's small, wiry, and speaks little. She passes as a boy most days, head down, hands busy. But when you catch her eyes in the lantern light, there's no mistaking it. She is not like the rest. She has chosen to be here, chosen the sea over safety, obscurity over visibility. And for a moment you don't know whether to feel awe or fear. Historians still argue whether women aboard ships were exceptions or quietly more common than records show. Official logs rarely mention them, but the letters, the diaries, the legends, they all tell a different story. Women disguised as boys, wives hiding in plain sight, lovers stowing away in barrels. There's even the case of Mary Read and Anne Bonny, two women who sailed as pirates, fought as fiercely as men, and were only discovered when one became pregnant. And when you see Marin hauling rope beside a man twice her size, you believe every word. No one says anything, not officially. But something shifts. The crew doesn't mock her, doesn't challenge her. In fact, they begin to protect her, subtly, instinctively, like cells forming around a wound. She eats in silence, sleeps with the rest. She smells of salt and tobacco and maybe, just maybe, lavender. You're not sure if it's real or just your memory begging for softness, but when she brushes past you one night, her shoulder grazing yours, it feels like your skin has been set on fire. One man isn't subtle. He leers, makes a crude joke. The next morning, he has a black eye and no memory of how it happened. No one questions it, not even the captain. You start seeing her everywhere, not because she's doing anything different, but because now you're aware. Her hands, stained and scarred like yours, move with practiced ease. Her voice, when she speaks, carries the rhythm of someone who's spent years blending in. But every now and then, when she laughs, when she sighs, you hear the edges of who she is, and it's enough to drive you mad. You begin to wonder why she's here, what she's running from, who she left behind. One sailor swears he saw her kiss a locket when she thought no one was looking. Another says she writes poetry in a journal hidden under her hammock. You never ask. You don't want to ruin the mystery. And maybe, deep down, you don't think you deserve the answer. There's a story in Sex with Kings about a royal mistress who disguised herself as a man to follow her lover into battle. She lived among soldiers, fought beside them, and no one suspected a thing until she died. And in that moment, the men around her wept, not just because she was gone, but because they realized how close she had been, how human, how unknowable. You think about that a lot when you see Marin hunched over a rope, her jaw clenched against the wind. You watch her form relationships, not overtly romantic, but deep, strangely intimate. She speaks more with some than others, shares smiles, quiet moments. You can't tell if it's affection or alliance, but it stings because it's not you. You ache to speak to her, to ask her why, but you don't. Because out here, silence is safer than curiosity. And yet she changes the ship. Not loudly, not intentionally, but undeniably. Men grow softer, less cruel. The usual crude jokes fade. The fights shrink. There's more singing, more sharing, as if her presence reminds them that there are other ways to be alive. You catch her once at dusk, staring out to sea, hair loose in the breeze. She looks more like a painting than a person, like someone half-remembered from a dream. She sees you, doesn't look away, just nods. And in that moment, you feel like she's looked through you, into every thought you've buried, every name you've never said aloud. Later, you find a carved figure in your boot. A tiny bird, wings open. No note, no explanation, just presence. You know who left it, and you keep it, tightly. One night, during a quiet watch, you sit beside her. Not close, not far. She offers you a piece of dried fruit. You accept. Neither of you speaks, but the silence feels different, safe, intimate. You wonder if she knows how much that means. You wonder if you'll ever get to tell her. In The History of Sexuality, Foucault writes about the power of hidden lives, how truth isn't always loud, and resistance isn't always violent. Sometimes it's simply showing up where you're not supposed to be, existing in defiance, living as yourself in a place that insists you shouldn't. That's what Marin is. Defiance. Embodied. She never reveals her story, never confirms anything, and eventually the ship docks. Men scatter to ports, brothels, bars, but not Marin. She vanishes before landfall. No goodbyes, no trace, just gone. You never see her again, but you find a note under your pillow, just 4 words. Keep singing, stay soft. No signature, but it doesn't need one. You keep the note. You carve it into your bunk. And every time the ship creaks at night, every time the sea howls like it wants to devour you whole, you whisper the words like a prayer. Keep singing, stay soft. You hear it first in a dream, a low moan, not of pain or pleasure, but of something in between. The kind of sound that seeps into your bones, makes your throat tighten without reason. Then the whisper, below the hold. You wake with your heart hammering. It's the middle of the night. The air is thick, too still, like the ship is holding its breath. You throw on your coat, not knowing why, only knowing that if you don't follow the whisper, it'll haunt you louder the next time. Below deck, the lantern light flickers like it's afraid. You pass sleeping bodies, hammocks swinging gently, the collective breath of exhausted men lulling like tide. Then you hear it again. A creak, a breath, a laugh. Too soft to be mocking, too familiar to be normal. You follow it down into the lower hold, where water sloshes beneath the boards and the smell of damp wood chokes your lungs. And then you see it. A door, slightly ajar, one you've never noticed before. You pause, because something about it feels wrong, or maybe too right. You push it open. Inside, the space is small, cramped, lit by a single candle wedged into a rusted lantern. And there, surrounded by stacked crates and discarded uniforms, are 4 men, sitting, close, too close, one with a hand on another's shoulder, another tracing circles on the deck with his boot, nervously. No one speaks at first. Then one of them, the youngest, barely a shadow in the dark, looks up and says, "You found us." Not surprised, not scared, just welcoming. You want to speak, but you don't, because your throat is tight, because you're afraid, not of them, but of what this means. This is the hush hold, the confession cove, the safe space that wasn't sanctioned. It doesn't have a name, doesn't need one. It exists outside the ship's laws, outside the reach of punishment. Here, men are not sailors or ranks or sins. They're just themselves. You sit. They make room. Someone offers you a flask. You drink. It tastes like salt and something sweet. Maybe citrus, maybe tears. One of them begins to speak, quietly, telling a story about a boy he once loved. Another talks about a dream he keeps having, of a kiss that never ends, of hands that never pull away. You listen. Then, slowly, you begin to share too. Nothing dramatic, just a truth. I miss being touched without fear. No one laughs, no one recoils. Instead, a hand finds your shoulder, rests there, warm, steady, real. Historians don't write about this. They write about discipline, order, hierarchy. They don't write about secret rooms filled with soft voices and shaking hands. They don't write about the places sailors carve out of shadow and silence so they can feel human again. But these spaces exist, not in logs, in memory, in the glances that linger too long, in the places where rules bend just enough to let the soul exhale. There's a journal, unpublished, tucked away in a museum basement, written by a sailor named Anders in 1812. In it, he describes something similar. A circle of nightmen, he calls it. They met in the empty galley, shared poems, secrets, sometimes even songs. We did not call it love, he writes. We called it survival. And when you sit here now, candlelight flickering against skin, you understand exactly what he meant. You don't stay long, maybe an hour, maybe two. Time feels different in spaces like this. But when you leave, something in you has shifted. Not fixed, but softened, like a knot that's loosened just enough to let the blood flow again. You return the next night, and the next. Each time the group changes slightly. Some faces new, some gone. One man cries into his own hands for 10 straight minutes. Another shares a letter he's written but never sent. One reads a poem about drowning that isn't really about water. You contribute too. Not always with words. Sometimes just with presence. Sometimes with a hand held in the dark. There's no sex here. Not really. That's not the point. It's about relief, not release. Intimacy without transaction. Touch without tension. It's the first time in months you've felt someone's skin without flinching. One night, a storm rages above. Wind howling like a beast denied. The ship groans. Men scramble. But in the hush room, no one moves. You sit in a circle, passing warmth from palm to palm, as if building a fire with only your bodies. You don't speak of the danger, only of memory, of things worth surviving for. A face, a voice, a promise whispered once and never forgotten. In the Erotic Spirit Through History, there's a section on hidden salons, clandestine meetings in basements of Paris and Lisbon, where men and women gathered to defy society's silence. These places were not just dens of forbidden touch, they were temples of honesty. And as you watch someone brush a tear from another's cheek, you realize this room, this hidden cell beneath a ship designed to break men, is a temple too. You worry it won't last. Nothing this human does. So you start writing again. More fervently, desperately, trying to capture every detail. The smell of sweat and seawater and ink, the sound of someone exhaling just before telling the truth, the weight of a shared silence that doesn't need to be filled. Eventually, someone disappears. Not from the room, from the ship, lost in a storm, overboard. No one knows for sure. But when the group meets that night, they don't light a candle. They leave his space empty. A silent vigil, a whispered name, a touch passed hand to hand, and then, quietly, someone sings. Just a line, just enough. You don't speak during that meeting, but afterward you stay. One other does too. You don't talk, you don't move. You just sit, side by side, your hands close enough to feel the warmth without needing to grasp it. And for the first time in months, you feel okay. Not whole, not healed, but okay. Later in your bunk, you find a small token, someone's glove, folded into your blanket. You don't know whose. Doesn't matter. You keep it. Because it's proof. Proof that something real happened in the dark. Something soft. Something true. And the sea? She churns on, unaware. But tonight, she is not the only one holding something sacred. You return from deck watch to find a song in the air. Not a shanty, not the usual rhythmic bark of men hauling rope or cursing the wind. This is different. Softer. A lullaby, maybe. Sung in a language you don't recognize but understand anyway. It carries through the ship like smoke. Tender, uninvited, impossible to ignore. You follow it instinctively, feet bare on the planks, drawn not by curiosity, but by a hunger you didn't realize had a voice. When you reach the mess, there's no singer in sight. Just a single note pinned to the beam with a rusted nail. 3 words. She remembers you. You stand there a long time, letting those syllables fill the spaces that duty and discipline could never reach. There's a rhythm to life aboard now, a kind of secret heartbeat that pulses just beneath the surface of duty. Orders are barked, sails are raised, storms are survived, but all of it happens inside a strange silence. Not emptiness. A silence like the hush of a cathedral, heavy with things unsaid. Every glance, every touch of shoulders in narrow corridors, every soft murmur between hammocks, these are the prayers you now live by. You begin to understand that survival on a ship like this isn't just physical. It's emotional, spiritual, sensual. And every man aboard is a priest of longing, offering up pieces of himself to a god no one dares name. You see it in their faces, eyes that linger a second too long, mouths that twitch with words that never leave. The man who polishes the same brass rail twice a day, as if memory might be hiding in the reflection. The one who hums old love songs under his breath, never quite finishing the melody. The way they breathe when they think no one's listening. The way they hold silence like it might shatter if dropped. Historians still argue whether ships cultivated intimacy or crushed it. Whether these bonds between men were accidents of isolation or deliberate rebellions against the cold, grinding machinery of empire. But you've seen too much now to believe in accidents. You've seen what happens when men are forced to carry all their softness in secret. What it does to the way they move, the way they speak, the way they break. This ship is full of ghosts. Some of the dead, yes, but more of the unsaid. You find yourself becoming more careful, not cautious, reverent. You speak softer. You listen harder. You touch less, but with greater purpose. Even a hand on someone's back becomes sacred. You begin to treat the body not as a tool, but as a story. Every scar a line. Every bruise a punctuation. You've stopped flinching at your own reflection. Some days you even nod to it. One night someone slips a feather into your coat. Small, gray, tucked just above your heart. No note, no name, but you wear it for the rest of the week. Not because you're sentimental, but because it reminds you that someone thought of you gently. And that alone is more valuable than gold. You catch a man writing something into the wood above his bunk. He doesn't stop when he sees you. He just keeps carving, slow and steady, until the word emerges. Still. You don't ask what it means. It could be anything. Still waiting. Still loving. Still here. You leave a lemon peel beside his bed the next morning. A small offering. A shared silence. The hush room is quieter now. Fewer tears. More stillness. You still meet. Still breathe together. But there's less desperation in it. Less panic. It's not that the ache is gone, it never goes. But now you've made peace with it. Given it space. Named it, even if only in your own mind. And that naming has changed you. You've begun to dream differently. Not of women, not of men, but of light, of warmth, of being held by something formless and kind. You wake without fear, sometimes even with a smile. And that's the most unsettling thing of all, because it means, against every odd, something inside you has healed. There's a sailor, Carrick, who used to speak only in orders, stern, loud, unyielding. Now he sings while he works, not loudly, not beautifully, but with heart. One day he hands you a poem, written on sailcloth, just a few lines. If I do not drown, it's because your voice kept me afloat. You carry that poem in your boot. It stays warm against your skin. In Sex with Kings, there's a line buried deep in the middle of a chapter. Desire, when denied, becomes religion. You don't remember the context. Doesn't matter. It's true. You've seen it with your own eyes. You've lived it, worshipped it. And you know now that out here, desire isn't a sin. It's a signal, a pulse that proves you're still alive. The days stretch. The sky remains indifferent. But something in you feels different. The same way a wound itches just before it finally scabs over. You're not healed, but you're no longer hemorrhaging. You're just here, floating, breathing, remembering. Aboard a ship full of men who have touched the edge of their own limits and learned how to sit with it. One morning, the lookout cries, "Land!" and everything rushes into motion. But this time, there's no frenzied desperation, no stampede toward the brothels. The men move like they've already found something out here, like they're no longer looking for proof that they're still men. They already know. They already are. You don't go ashore right away. You sit on the rail and watch the waves. You whisper a name, not yours, not anyone real, just a name that has become your anchor. And when the wind brushes your cheek, you swear it feels like a hand. That night, before you dock, you find one last note in your hammock. It says, "If we forget each other on land, we will remember at sea." You fold it, press it to your lips, then tuck it inside your chest pocket, where it joins the feather, the poem, the scraps of dreams you refused to let die. And as the ship groans toward the harbor, the sky soft with the promise of sunrise, you breathe out slowly. No rush, no fear. You made it. You survived. You remembered how to want without shame. You remembered how to love without needing permission. You remembered how to be touched, even in the absence of hands. And now, as the tide shifts beneath you and the birds cry overhead, you whisper goodbye, not to the sea, but to the man you were when this all began. And now, the ship fades. The creak of wood softens to a lull. The waves hush themselves into rhythm. Your hammock sways, and the salt in your hair smells less like labor, more like memory. The ache in your chest doesn't vanish. It simply grows quieter. Like a dog finally resting its head on your lap, asking nothing more than to just be. You've traveled through storms, through silence, through shadowed corners of longing that most men will never speak of. And yet, you survived. Not with fists or fire, but with softness, with breath, with the courage to want, even when it hurt. Out here, the stars are closer. And as they pulse above you, one by one, you understand something deep and wordless, that even the darkest ocean holds light beneath the surface, that even in absence, connection persists, that even in isolation, You were never truly alone. So sleep now, sailor. Let the ship rock you gently. Let the wind hum its lullaby through the sails. The voyage is over. The ache has found its place. And you are safe. You are still. You are enough. Good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.